Welcome to the September 12th regular meeting of the Calaveras County Planning Commission. We're opening the meeting now, and let's get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any agenda changes?
No.
Thank you. So we will get started with a general public comment period on any land use item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission and is not posted on the consent or regular agenda. So is there anybody who would like to speak to an item not on the agenda today? Seeing none, we are going to, are you going to? Come on up.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bill McManus. My comments go back to the last meeting that we had, and during that meeting, the chairperson, actually it was kind of refreshing, said she didn't know what was going on with a certain topic, wasn't informed about it. It's unfortunate that the most important issue in this county's history you shouldn't be up to speed on it. What made it particularly worse was that you called out to the audience for someone to help you with that information, and it happened to be a pot grower. Now, I think it should have been open. You should have opened public comments at that point and allow other people here with a dissenting view or who would like to rebut what was said so that you have both sides of the argument. So I hope that when we go out to the audience that everyone gets a chance to say something about it, even if it's a limited public comment, just to say, are there any opposing views or something like that. That's transparency. You know, that's a fair, a level playing field for the citizens when they come before the altar of government. We want to know that we're going to be treated fairly. So that was my comment, and also on nothing to do with the agenda item, but the process. I think that the agenda item should have been split. These are both very complicated topics, the EIR and the regulations. By putting them together, we go back to the way it was a couple of years ago when we had the Planning Commission meeting at Town Hall in San Andreas, where it went on day after day after day. On the first day, public comment was taken, and we had to sit there for 3 days waiting to see what the Planning Commission was going to do. We finally got the chairman to say, okay, we're going to have one more session of public comments because so much information had been put in since that first day. So the public really didn't get a chance to respond. So I'm hoping you do the same thing here, that public comment on the ordinance is allowed and public comment on the EIR, because the EIR has to be done before you can move forward with the ordinance. And new information is coming up about the possibility of that being in trouble. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that you guys have all listened to the latest news about e-cigarettes, that they are not good. 1 in 5 middle school children are using it at least once a month. And I'm just really perturbed that Calaveras County would even consider doing another drug and producing as much pot as they can possibly produce. There are people that already have their lights up and everything else for their pot. And in anticipation of it going through. And they look like Christmas houses all over Valley Springs. It seems like an EIR would address something like this. It's the environment that we are creating.
I'm sorry, you're starting to speak to the agenda item at this
Oh,
point.
sorry.
So
All
you
right.
need to speak only to items not on the agenda today.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, the e-cigarette thing should be a wake-up call to all the other things, the issues that are coming before the Planning Commission, and it doesn't seem like it's being taken into consideration at all. The homeless population is increasing, and when did that start? It started when they approved medical marijuana. And now we got a bunch of homeless people, and they want to place them here, there, and the other place. And the people that happen to live next door, especially the schools, right here in Calaveras County, they have this planned. And we're creating our own homeless through our actions, and I totally think it's awful.
Are there any further public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda, and there are no items on the consent agenda today. So we will reopen the continuation of the cannabis cultivation ordinance hearing. And Peter, would you like to bring us up to date on what's happened between our last meeting and today?
So good morning. Yes, you've received some updated information. We tried to capture all of the edits that were made at the last meeting, including some of just the technical changes that were brought to our attention from Commissioner Laddish. A few things that we caught that weren't substantive in our estimation. We've provided an underlined strikeout version of that document. It's coming up on the screen right now. We can sort of, we will sort of work through the rest of the ordinance using that document that you received. And I'm sure we'll have to sort of trade back and forth between the notes that you had on the original document and this one. So thanks for bearing with us on this complex issue. There are a couple of additional edits that staff has suggested. And I think probably the best way to approach those is we just work through the ordinance when we come to that section. We'll discuss at that point in time. I think the best thing to do would be, I believe we ended at the beginning of 1795-060 on page 15 of the previous document. It's now page 16 because of the edits. But I think before that, it'd be good to sort of quickly go over what we had done last time, not reiterate all that, but if there's anything that we didn't capture the edits accurately, or there was going to be some new information about those previous sections, do that first before we get into the ongoing discussion of working our way through the ordinance. Is that acceptable?
And I'd point out that I know we had some discussion last time about having input from the sheriff's office, and I noticed the sheriff has just arrived. So
we've notified the representatives of other departments that are affected by this and let them know that the hearing would be today. I know that there's a representative from the Environmental Management Agency. I'm pretty sure Code Compliance will be here as well. So if you have questions of them, they're available to answer your questions.
Some members of the audience seem to be having a hard time hearing you, so just get a little closer.
Speak up.
I'll try to speak louder.
Bring your microphone closer.
Yeah. Do you want me to just quickly run through the changes that have been made
Well, I guess rather than go through all the changes,
Yeah.
if there is any questions that any of the
But if-
commissioners had about those changes, let's maybe hit those. I don't think it's necessary or necessary to go through each one of those. So if there's any commissioners that had any concerns about the edits that we had done
Right.
leading up to section 060, now would probably be the best time to do that.
Right.
I do on the,
So, Tim, can you
excuse
hang
me.
on one
Sure.
minute? I think Kelly has something he'd like.
Well, a couple of things. I should speak briefly to my continuing to participate in going over this draft regulation. At the last meeting up front, I identified some concerns that I had. And after the public comment, I still have those concerns. And so at this point, I'm inclined to vote against recommending this draft ordinance to the board. So when I make comments and suggestions, that's where I'm coming from. I don't want any of my efforts to try to improve this draft to mislead people into thinking that I'm for it. And people can consider where I'm at in this, in evaluating what I say about this draft. And before we get to some of the edits, there was one that struck me that I didn't think we had talked about. And it's up front. If I can find it here. Yeah, on page 10, 1795-030C is an edit here that I did not understand that we had talked about. It strikes the provision that says, notwithstanding any of the above, the provisions of this chapter shall not apply to cannabis dispensaries, retailers, which are separately regulated under Chapter 17.91 of the Calaveras County Code. So that's the first edit that I was concerned about. 'Cause I don't know where that's coming from. I don't think we discussed it.
I don't recall a discussion of it either, but anybody else?
yeah, I'm awaiting Peter's comment.
I'm sorry, what section was that? I was trying to-
It's on page
Oh,
10,
where am I now? Oh,
17.95.030C got stricken.
On our latest version, Peter, it's at the
Yes.
top of page 10.
Right, I got it. I think this was an edit that county council had suggested based on the fact that it is regulated under 1791. There are specific provisions under our current code that allow for cultivation under specific circumstances within a dispensary. And any regulation of that would be handled under that ordinance. We do have a provision that says in this that it does, well, and the real reason is that we've carried over those provisions from the current code for 1791 into this ordinance as well. And so this would be a conflict with that provision that says you can cultivate in a CP zone where there's existing dispensary based on the standards established for that type of cultivation. So indoor cultivation is currently allowed under 1791, and we've tried to incorporate those provisions into this ordinance, and so this section here, C, would be a conflict with that. So that was an edit that the county council had made because it created an internal conflict with the ordinance. You're right, it was not discussed by the commission.
Okay.
So it's a technical issue.
We felt that was a technical change necessary so we don't create an internal conflict with the ordinance.
Okay, well, I got a little bit concerned because there was another issue raised about the definition of a dispensary. under 17.95.020AA that seems to say that that definition includes the Business and Professions Code's definition as well as a medical dispensary. And the concern was raised that the Business and Professions Code definition was not limited to medical. And I don't know whether that's correct or not.
That is correct. You can have, Business Professions Code doesn't call them dispensaries, it calls them retailers, and they can be adult use or medical. But as Peter indicated, our current 17.91 does limit our local dispensaries, which we call them under that ordinance, to medical.
Okay, then perhaps I was being suspicious here, but when you get to page 11, 17.95.050A, it says a dispensary operating in compliance with MACUSA and Chapter 17.91 is allowed. And so my concern was somebody could tie all this together and say, well, guess what? Now they're allowing the dispensaries to sell recreational marijuana.
So the board has directed us to modify 1791 and with the indication that they would like to consider allowing adult use from the dispensaries. What we didn't want to do is create, and so right now, the ordinance limits it to medical only. The board has indicated they would like to see a change to that, and we're working on a draft ordinance. What we didn't want was to create a conflict with this ordinance that limits it to medical only when the board's indicated a desire to modify that to allow both adult use and medical.
So would striking this provision together with the other, with the definition of a dispensary that includes recreational, does that then mean that this ordinance would permit recreational cannabis to be sold out of our dispensaries?
Only upon adoption of an amendment to 1791. So this ordinance would allow both, provided that the regulations for dispensaries allowed both. But that's a discussion and debate for a future meeting.
So right now, everything just refers to 1791, so that this document would not have to be modified if that document was modified.
That's correct.
And as I understand it, by saying operating, and this is the section that Commissioner Wooster was just reading, 17.95.050A, talks about operating in compliance with MACUSA and Chapter 1791. So as of right now, Chapter 1791 only permits medical marijuana sales, and so that section necessarily recognizes the current status of 17.91. And yet, if the 17.91 were changed, why then it would recognize that status.
That's correct.
Okay.
That opens up the question of what that does with the adequacy of the EIR. Because the DEIR did not purport to cover dispensaries at all.
Well, and this doesn't modify the dispensary ordinance.
Might be an issue.
This just incorporates whatever the dispensary ordinance ends up being.
That's correct.
And as of the moment, this is either, if it was to be adopted by the Board of Supervisors, it would be adopted with the current dispensary ordinance, which would not allow adult use until such time as that came forth.
Right, that's right.
Okay. Does anybody else have, on those kind of interwoven items, does anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, I have a lot of similar concerns, but I have a major concern that we're spending a lot of time going through these regulations, and a lot of things we're going making decisions on have to do with mitigating things because of the EIR, what's required. Yet there's serious questions whether the EIR is even acceptable in the form that we have it. We all want to ignore the elephant in the room, but we have a very detailed letter from an attorney here pointing out why we cannot use this EIR. We've had public comment pointing that same thing out, but we keep ignoring it. We haven't even dealt with the EIR, whether or not we can continue to use it or whether we need a supplemental EIR or a new EIR. How can we go through and keep working on regulations based on something that quite possibly is going to get tossed out? I think that needs to be dealt with first, and then we move on to whether or not we deal with regulation.
Well, it seems to me that in order to evaluate the EIR and whether it covers the situation that we are enacting, we have to figure out what we might be enacting. So we have to figure out what is it that we're asking the EIR to cover. So I see your point, thinking the cart's before the horse, and I'm looking at it from the other point of view that we need to come up with a regulation and then see if the EIR is sufficient to cover it.
When regulation was done before, the EIR was done first. Then they developed the regulation based on the recommendations of the EIR. It wasn't the other way around.
No, the EIR...
The EIR that we have now also recommends that the best way to protect the environment is a ban. And so we enacted a ban, and now we're going back and we're going to try to take that out and say we're not going to do what is the best recommendation. We're going to put in a whole new recommendation that wasn't even in it before through an addendum, and there's serious legal questions on whether that can be done. But I sat through all the process of the EIR. We went through the process of the EIR last time, months before the regulation was worked on.
Actually, I think that Peter can probably give us a little bit of an accurate summary of the history, which is that the EIR was created to cover multiple possible regulations, including both regulation and a potential ban. Is that?
Originally, it was looked at for regulation, and they said a ban was the best thing. And then they asked the group, because I was in the meeting, that put the EIR together. They said, could you add in for a second choice, regulations? That wasn't initially in it. That was then added into it so that they could look at regulation, because the EIR said a ban is the best thing for the environment.
I'd like to break in on that for just a second.
But the point is that
Commissioner comment for just 1 minute. You'll all get a chance to talk again, okay? So you were both here for this, so if you could give us your perception of what that history was.
So the project description for the EIR the notice of preparation was released prior to the adoption of the urgency ordinance, was for a regulatory program. The EIR contained a number of options, including the ban. It also talked about other alternatives, such as reducing or increasing the parcel size, changing the zones that cannabis cultivation would be allowed in. We did receive a letter yesterday from an attorney that suggests that the addendum is inappropriate. The great things about attorneys is they will have an opinion for every position that could be made. And we have vetted the addendum with our counsel as well as our outside counsel, and we have a difference of opinion on the issue. Typically, when a project is approved, the first course of action is to certify the EIR or adopt the negative declaration, depending on the document, and then taking action on the project itself. But that's taken as sort of a single step. They sort of have to go hand in hand. You're looking at what the project is, you're looking at how you modify the project. Yes, it's true, the ban was identified as the least environmentally damaging alternative. But just as any project that has an EIR, say it was a subdivision, not approving the subdivision would be the most environmentally sensitive action. but the county needs to make a finding of whether those alternatives are feasible. If it's the county's objective to adopt a regulatory ordinance, it can make findings of overriding consideration. And clearly a ban would not meet the objective of the county's, if it's the majority to adopt an ordinance, that would, the objective is to adopt a cultivation ordinance. So the fact that a ban was selected last time and was supported by the EIR was one action the county could take and did take. Now the county is reconsidering that action, and we believe that the addendum accurately describes the information, that there is not significant new information that would require the preparation of a subsequent or new EIR as suggested in the letter. And that's a determination that you will need to make a recommendation on to the board, and the board will have to decide, what is the appropriate course of action on that. Was there any specific question other than that?
The question was the timeline. Was a regulation, was the urgency ordinance under preparation at the time that the EIR was undertaken?
A permanent ordinance was under preparation at that time.
The urgency ordinance was
The
already...
project description was a draft ordinance that was prepared, from which the urgency ordinance was later taken from, modified somewhat, but so the EIR was the notice of preparation, the decision to prepare the EIR and the project description predated the urgency ordinance, and the project description was a regulatory ordinance.
May I
Yeah,
just say
yes.
one point? And that is, it's stressed many, many times that the EIR said that the ban was the environmentally preferred alternative. The EIR also makes it very clear that it takes that position on the assumption that there will be full compliance with the ban. And I submit that it's clear that there has not been full compliance with the ban, and so I think that the stress on that, on the statement about it being the environmentally superior alternative is misplaced.
But we also assume with regulation that there's going to be full compliance with regulation.
I'm not.
And under
making
the
that
urgency ordinance, under regulation, we found out there was not full compliance with the regulation. It was far from that. And to assume that we're going to write regulations and there's going to be full compliance with it is also a fool's errand.
I'm not making that assumption.
But the EIR makes that assumption. And I sat through all the days and days and days of discussion on the general plan. And I sat here and I heard every single day the environmentalists were in here pushing and pushing and pushing how important our environment is. I noticed that they don't show up on this. They don't care about the environment. And it seems that a lot of what we're doing in this regulation says we don't really care about the environment when it comes to marijuana. But boy, if you want to build a house or you want to build a new development that's going to create real jobs in this county, we are going to sock it to you like you won't believe, because we've got to not only go with what the state wants environmental, we've got to go beyond that. That's what I heard in the general plan. Why isn't that same concern being shown when it comes to growing cannabis in this county? It has been proven that there's a lot of environmental harm has come because of what's been brought into the county. I think when we get a chance that we could talk to the sheriff's department, they can tell us some of the things they ran into. Because along with regulation came illegal grows. They increased. And that's going to happen again. We're opening the door saying, come on in, we're going to set it up so you can hide amongst all these grows again. And we're going to go right back to where we were. Because one, we don't have the staff. We've talked about that the last time. Staffing is not put in place. But yet we're opening it up, they say 25 is the most they can handle. Yet we're opening it up to potentially 190. I heard one of the growers shout out that they know it's 350. They have a different number that they believe are eligible. We don't even know for sure how many, but we're basing this EIR on a number that we don't even really know what that number is. And then there's going to be, the legal challenges are going to become to say you can't limit the people. Once you open it up, how are you going to limit it if somebody has a property that fits into the description that's in here and they say, well, how can you refuse me and give favoritism to these people? That's going to become an issue. So we really don't know how many grows we're going to wind up with. Plus, we're doubling the canopy size. So that's a greater environmental impact on our water and everything. And you cluster them all together. There's so many issues that need to be dealt with in an EIR that are not dealt with in this EIR. So that's a major concern I have. I think that we should table for a period of time and then go and look at what we're doing with the EIR and make a decision on that first. Then move forward. Like we said, we didn't even have separate public comment for an EIR. They did that last time we had regulation. They had separate meetings on that and allowed public comment and public input. There's no new public input being allowed on what they're doing with the EIR, and I just don't think that's right.
So 5 minutes of public input per person was allowed at our last meeting, which was to address both the EIR and the ordinance.
But that's,
So
again,
there's-
that goes back to what was said earlier, and this came from Peter Maurer, is that we should not be in a hurry. We need to do this right. We shouldn't rush it to meet some arbitrary deadline, but that's exactly what we're doing. That's why they combine the two together. We had testimony of people coming forward last time, said that it wasn't properly announced that even that we were discussing this. I can't believe how many people I talked to have no idea that this is even coming before the county, because it's buried. We don't want a lot of public comment. Why? Because if there's a lot of public outcry, that alone triggers a need for a new EIR. So we don't want that to happen.
I'm going to ask that you let me complete my comments, because it sounds like we're moving into a lot of philosophical discussion here. And really, excuse me, will the public please hold their comments also and let me complete my comments?
No one has to hold our comments entirely this whole time and the last meeting. We're
No.
done with it.
One more time, let me complete my comments. We haven't heard from all the commissioners yet, so we have heard a response in general to the question of whether the EIR is appropriately used with an addendum to address a new ordinance. So our legal counsel, our planning staff have indicated that they believe it is an appropriate measure. We heard from the public, both yes and no on that question during the public comments. It is true, we did not hold separate public comments just on the EIR. Do the commissioners feel that they are in a position to be polled on this matter at this point as to whether we need to move forward with discussion of the ordinance, or whether we need to step back and look at the EIR independently? Commissioner Wooster.
I think the two go together. I think that we should hear from the sheriff and from code compliance while they're here, number one. Then I think we should go through the draft regulation and see what we wind up with. And then I think we need to put it together and revisit the issue whether an addendum is appropriate, because I tend to agree it may not be. But I don't think we can split these things out, because I think they're related.
Thank you. Commissioner Fiorino.
I think we should go with the EIR.
I totally agree with Kelly that there are parallel issues, so we can't see what the result of one would be without the other hand in hand, so move forward.
I agree that we should continue with figuring out what our regulatory ordinance might be, and then we can see whether it fits within current EIR with the addendum if that's appropriate.
And I agree. I do think that this is a good opportunity for commissioners to address their questions to the sheriff and code compliance officer. So why don't we go ahead and take care of that so they don't have to spend all day here. So who would like to get started with questions?
I have questions for both, so
Good.
whoever wants to come up.
Good morning, Sabrina Cable with Code Compliance.
Good morning. Your office has been issuing citations for illegal grows starting as early as 2016, correct? Okay, I'm interested in the figures for the citations that have been issued and the resulting abatements. So for 2016, you had approximately how many citations?
Approximately 70 citations were issued in 2016.
70?
70 citations.
Okay. And 2017
228 citations,
and 2018
39.
and this year?
63 so far. We have about 10 that we're preparing to issue.
Okay. Then in addition to those, were there joint operations with your code compliance unit and the sheriff's department to abate illegal grows?
Correct. The sheriff's department calls us out when they do eradications, and we handle the non-cannabis code compliance issues on the properties.
And how many of those joint operations were there this year?
We believe there's about 50. We've issued about 33 citations so far. We have some lesser priority ones that we haven't gotten to yet, but still will be addressed.
Okay. Now, is it fair to say that after these citations are issued and these joint operations conducted with the sheriff's department, that those grows were abated?
Can you repeat that?
Is it fair to say that for all of these citations that you've covered, that those grows were abated?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in addition to the grows that got abated, either by code compliance or the sheriff or both, have you seen where growers have ceased operations themselves without code compliance or the sheriff forcing them to do so?
Absolutely.
And would you say that's a fair amount?
Yeah, a fair amount.
Okay. This draft ordinance specifies a bond of $5,000 to cover the costs of destruction of cannabis and cleanup costs, trash, debris, other wastes. Does that seem low to you?
It does.
And if the county were to come up with a provision that would protect the county against having to absorb some of these costs itself, the number would be considerably higher, wouldn't it?
I believe so, yes. We have done abatements, and the lowest to just remove plants is about $2,000, not including staff costs. The average just plant removal is probably more like $8,000. And again, that doesn't include any staff time. That's just a invoice from contractors.
If you had a plant that required cleanup, in addition to just abating the plants, could it go as high as 30, 40,000?
I wouldn't say that's the norm, but it's highly possible, yes.
Okay. Have you had to do any remediation involving cleaning up the effects of grading or remediating grading?
We have not really dealt with grading remediation yet.
Would you anticipate that if that happened, those costs would be considerable?
I believe so. And I don't know what they would be. I don't have a point of reference. Public Works might have a better point of reference than me.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I weigh in on one thing that Commissioner Worcester asked about?
Yes.
You asked about absorption of costs for abatements, and we do have cost recovery mechanisms where the condition constitutes a code violation. Under Government Code 25845, where we go in to abate a nuisance, we're allowed to lien the property for all costs of abatement, including enforcement costs, including staff time, including the costs of holding a hearing, and that becomes a super priority lien on the property that is collected on the property tax rolls. So we generally recover that money. So it's the only time that we don't is where the cost of the lien exceeds the total value of the property, because a nuisance abatement lien is, as I said, a super priority lien that jumps ahead of the first mortgage. The only lien holders that are ahead of us for recovering costs is the IRS.
Thank you. That was actually on my list to talk about later today, so Commissioner Fiorino.
I would go in a little bit different direction on these questions, but I do have one. You mentioned at the study session that you had a lack of staffing. Do you foresee that being taken care of if potentially we have 190 grows? Do you have the staffing for that?
We've been working with the county with the fee study and different scenarios based on registration levels.
And I have some concerns, some things you shared. At one time I worked in environmental work and did water sampling. And when I did that, I had to go through HAZWOPER training. Have you had HAZWOPER training? Because you're going onto sites potentially with harmful materials.
I have, not all of our staff has, but that has been taken into account with the fee study.
So, it's taken, but you haven't, you were going on these sites without proper HAZWOPER training?
Some staff was, yes.
Were you given the proper PPE?
No,
You were not?
no,
So potentially you were exposed to things that you don't know what you're exposed to.
that's true.
But they did do a medical baseline exam for you?
We have not had baseline exams yet.
Okay.
It is budgeted for this fiscal year.
So we really have no idea what you were exposed to?
No.
And I'm bringing that up because it's very concerning to me, because like I said, I used to do water sampling, and that was at wineries and old gas stations and things, and I couldn't even go sample that water until I had all that done.
It's a concern for us too, and that's why I brought it up at the study session, to ensure that that would be addressed if regulation
Well, I
came
hope
back.
so, because nobody should go onto any site where there's potential hazardous materials without proper training, and that's a real concern.
I agree. Staff safety is utmost priority.
Do you feel more prepared? You said you had to develop a program on the fly. Do you feel you're more prepared now?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so other than you need additional staffing and you're trying to work out what
There'll
that's going
be-
to cost?
Yeah, there'll be minor adjustments to be made based on what the outcome of the ordinance is versus what we were inspecting and dealing with last time, but we are significantly more prepared.
As far as procedure and that?
Yes,
You know what needs to be done, what equipment you
Absolutely.
need, what
Yeah,
exams you need, all that?
yes.
Okay, well, if this goes through, and it seems like they're pushing on a fast track to go through, and you start getting hit with say, over 100, how are you going to handle that until you're allowed to get more staffing?
Well, we have the county divided into districts, and each officer handles their own district, and they do a great job at prioritizing their time, and I will have faith in my staff. They'll be able to handle it to the best of their ability.
And one of the things that's in this is that all the people that apply, that they have to have also done what was required of them according to the ban. So you've been able to inspect all those to
We
see
have-
that people have been holding up their end of the bargain.
We have not inspected every registered grow.
You have not. How many have you inspected?
I don't have that number. I'm sorry.
So we're talking about holding people accountable to having done what they're supposed to do under the ban before they can go ahead and grow, but yet we don't know if they've even done that. So we really don't know how many because no inspections haven't been done.
If you're referring to remediating their sites
Yes.
back to what they were prior, you're correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
You mentioned you had joint operation with the sheriff, so what's that entail? Of course, removal of plants, when you remediate, who takes care of that? What do you cover when that happens?
When the sheriff eradicates the plants, they call code complaints out. We inspect the property for code violations. We find a lot of substandard housing, lack of permits, hazardous electrical, et cetera. We issue the owner of the property a citation, and they generally comply and clean it up and obtain the proper permits or tear down unpermitted buildings. If they don't, then that would be a county abatement, and we would do the work for them. But we've had, while it's a long process to get them into compliance, we've had good compliance with it.
So how many code compliances, I mean, you mentioned a few numbers, but how many of these code compliance citations were generated by your department and not the sheriff's department?
So the code compliance department can cite people for their plans. That's a separate issue than when the sheriff takes the plans.
But how many have your department initiated rather than the sheriff's
Rather
department?
than the sheriff.
initiated?
It has been, 63 were issued this year, with 10 more that we're preparing to issue.
Okay, that's out of your department?
Yes,
Okay.
just for plants. As far as citations for code violations on grow sites that were eradicated, that number's about 50.
50?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned, well, I'm kind of curious as well, as the hazardous material. What kind of hazardous material have you encountered on these grow sites?
What you would expect, pesticides, fertilizers, human waste, et cetera.
Okay. What quantities, I mean, how much fertilizers, what type of fertilizers?
Well, and the sheriff can speak to this as well, there's a great deal of unknowns. There can be swimming pools full of unknown substances and gallon drums, 5-gallon drums, 50-gallon drums. It just depends on the site.
Okay. So you guys don't test?
No.
Don't necessarily just?
We do not
Use
test.
a class 1 or 2 hazardous material and get rid of it?
We don't get rid of hazardous material.
You said the contractors, you have contractors come in and mitigate that for you, correct?
They can, yes. We haven't had to deal with that contract removing hazardous material this year. The sheriff probably has done that with Fish and Wildlife.
Okay.
We usually will refer it to Fish and Wildlife if we find unknown substances because they're better equipped to deal with it. We just don't have the training or expertise or ability to test, so
Okay. All right, thank you.
you're welcome.
I just want to thank you for what you've been doing the last few years, and all the hearings we had during the urgency ordinance time. I realize your office has been out there literally on the front lines, and I very much appreciate that, and I appreciate all the information you've given us today, and I don't have any further questions.
Thank
Just
you.
admiration.
Thank you, Commissioner Allen. Thank you.
I just have a question about fertilizers and chemicals, soil amendments, that kind of thing. Would it be helpful to you if there was a program for the ag department to actually manage that the way they do for other agricultural operations?
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you
You're welcome.
very
Thank you.
much.
Any more questions?
Yes. If you got hit with 100 applications to deal with, I assume that would just take you more time.
Yeah, it would take more time if we did not bring on additional staff.
25 you could handle in a reasonable time. If it's more than that, it's going to take a long while.
It would take more time. I believe the way the ordinance is written addresses a lot of the deficiencies with the UO as far as inspections and re-inspections. If they cannot cultivate before they're fully approved, then that'll take care of so many problems.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Come on up. I'm sure we have questions for you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Sheriff Tibasilio, Calaveras County. Who wants to start first?
I will.
Okay.
All right. Is it correct that the foothill counties around us, Amador and Tuolumne, still ban commercial cannabis grows?
Correct. At this time, they do.
And is it correct to say that as a result of the previous growing in this county, there are a number of sites that are already prepared, in other words, graded, they have water available, they'd be ready to go?
Correct.
Are you seeing now any activity taking place, like setting up to grow, since the board has signaled it might repeal the ban and install a regulation?
That's a hard question to answer correctly because we've been seeing the illegal grows have not discontinued. I heard Sabrina talking about, and we'll get into that I'm sure in a little bit, about the pesticides and all that stuff. You gotta understand the sheriff's office doesn't so much deal with the registered grow sites. We were doing some of the inspections when the UO first started. We pretty much deal with just the illegal sites. So when you talk about illegal substances or pesticides and herbicides and all those types of things, I can't attest to what goes on the legal grow sites. The sites that we were on that were legal, there wasn't an issue. It's the illegal grow sites that we are dealing with, so that's where we're seeing the bigger problems.
Are you aware, is there activity on social media that identifies which counties, such as Calaveras, allow growing or say that they're planning on allowing growing?
Absolutely.
Okay, and the proposal now is to increase the maximum size of an outdoor grow to 1 acre, correct?
I heard that, yes.
Now, if this draft ordinance or something like it is enacted, would you expect to see a lot of employees coming into this county, including homeless people?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that they're homeless, but there is going to be a lot of people that will be coming in to do the trimming and processing of the marijuana.
And do you think that people who wish to grow illegally will be coming in to do so?
Absolutely. If history shows it repeats itself, it will.
So in your judgment, is illegal growing likely to ramp up if this draft ordinance is passed?
Yes. They'll what we call hide in plain sight. And it's something that's going to happen because what goes on, and like you mentioned earlier in social media, they're going to advertise that Calaveras County is going to be allowed growing again, and there are going to be people that are going to come in and try to hide under the radar because they know that there's going to be quite a few sites again. So it's going to be an issue. But we already have the issue. It's going to enhance it, but the issue is already there because we still have illegal grow sites. We're eradicating illegal grow sites at a rate of probably 4 to 6 to 8 a week. As we speak right now, I have guys out on a grow. And that's illegal because everything is banned right now. So it doesn't matter whether you have a regulatory program or a ban, you're going to have illegal grows. It's just, that's reality.
The question is, will the prospect of regulation and the regulation enhance the problem?
Again, I think that we saw that with the urgency ordinance. Again, they're hiding in plain sight. You're going to see a ramp up of illegal growers coming in. So realistically, it's going to bring more people into the community that are going to try it illegally. And it's happening in all the other counties also. I've talked to many sheriffs that have commercial growing going on, and they're having the same issues.
They were having some legal commercial going on, and then the illegals come too.
Yeah, Monterey County, their ordinance is quite a bit more stringent than this. They're allowing 25 plants as commercial growing, but they saw an uptick of illegal growers. Again, trying to hide in plain sight. It's just, I mean, alcohol is still a legal commodity, but yet they still bootleg across Kentucky, and, you know, if it's illegal and they can make money on it, they're going to do it. I am actually in a meeting with the governor and the governor's office next Friday over in Sonora regarding illegal growing in our communities. They're going to be addressing what they can do to help, so it's an ongoing battle.
So is it anticipated that the state may be coming in to help?
I don't know that you know what, I can't answer that, Commissioner Wooster, right now. I know that at today's date, they have already stated, I've talked to Department of Food and Agriculture and the Department of Public Health, they are not going to come in and help. They don't have the manpower. I think that they're coming to solicit information from the local sheriffs to find out what kind of problems we're having so that they can make a decision on what direction they're going to go. Again, they don't have the manpower to assist at this point in time. So I can't give you an honest answer on that question. I don't know until we speak.
Now, you heard Sabrina Cable tell us how many citations and consequent abatements have taken place over the years with her department, and some of those were joint operations with your department. Can you give us a figure as to how many illegal grow sites your office has eradicated?
I can.
Starting in 2016?
In 2016, we did 11. In 2017, we did 68.
How many?
68.
68.
In 2018, we did 55. And as of this morning, we have done 57, and if you count the one they're doing today, it would be 58.
Now, the ones for 2019, does that include the ones where code compliance was on a joint operation?
Negative. These numbers that I gave you were all on search warrants.
Okay,
None of those were 806 eradications.
okay. Thank you. And have you seen a number of growers ceasing operations themselves without your office rating them or code compliance issuing citations?
Well, again, my initial answer would be no, and because, again, we're not dealing with the registered growers. I know that the registered growers that we observed when the ban came into play, they ceased and desist. Most of them, there were some that still continued, and we dealt with those. But again, we deal with the illegal side of it more than the compliance side. So the people that we were dealing with were the ones that were never going to register anyhow.
This draft ordinance would increase the allowable size of outdoor grows from 22,000 that was in the urgency ordinance to 1 acre. What effects can you see coming from that if it's passed?
Honestly, I don't know that it's going to affect the sheriff's office and how we do business. Again, we're not dealing with the regulatory side so much as we are the illegal side. It'll make our security inspections maybe last a little bit longer because we're going to have a bigger area to cover. But I don't think it's going to affect us.
The draft ordinance limits the bond amount to cover the costs of destruction of cannabis and cleanup of trash and debris and other waste to $5,000. What is your opinion whether that amount is appropriate?
I believe it's low. And the cost of eradication varies so much. For instance, we did a grow 2 days ago where we eradicated over 3,000 plants, but I think the tallest plant was about a foot tall. We were able to put them all, in the back of a pickup and take it to the landfill. The grow site that we're at today, there's 150 plants, and I'm here to tell you that I saw pictures of those plants, and they're about 15 feet tall and about 10 feet around. So it's going to be different. So the time that it takes is going to vary. Whether we use a contractor or not is going to vary. So those prices go up and down per site. But I think the price of $5,000 is low because when we do the eradication, again, we go in and we remove the plants. That's all we do. We don't go in and do any regrading. We're not collecting up any pesticides that are left, any fertilizers that are left. Nothing else is being done from the sheriff's office. When we receive a search warrant from the judge, it's basically the evidence that we collect is the marijuana, any cash, firearms, anything that shows cultivation or sales of that. We don't go after and clean up all the hoses that are out there. So our side is very limited. And the problem that we've seen in the past, and again, I'm speaking to the illegal grow sites, and a register site that would be shut down for some purpose, whether it was through 806 or through the sheriff's office, that nobody is doing the cleanups on the environmental side, on anything. We go in on the search warrant and we take the plants and we leave. Code compliance does come in behind us on darn near every site that we have because of what Sabrina spoke to, which is illegal electricity running who knows where and those types of things. The sheriff's office doesn't have any authority after we leave from the search warrant. So anything else that comes behind that is going to either be code compliance or should be environmental health, or like you spoke of, having the ag commissioner come in and do the assessments. So I know there was CDF came in behind some of our sites to cite for removal of trees without permits. And again, code compliance was there if there was grading issues. So all those costs are not being accounted for, I don't believe.
Would the $5,000 figure, in your opinion, be adequate to cover what you need to do, which is remove the plants?
Again, depends on the site. I think it's a little bit low, but I think if it's just for the sheriff's office on an average, it's probably about $2,500 low. And that's, again, a guess.
Well, if I was looking to protect the county for not getting stuck itself for costs of removing these plants, and I wanted to make sure the bond was high enough to cover your end of it, not the cleanup, just your end of it, what would that number be?
Well, like I said, probably about $7,500, and that, I think, would cover the cost of the area that you're going to lose at the landfill, because we can't burn this stuff. If we did, the whole county would be high. We can't chip it. We've tried chippers, and it's got so much moisture in it that it plugs chippers up, so we end up hauling it and putting it in the landfill. So you're losing space in our landfill, too. It is funny. I've had people ask me, that's why I say, why don't you just burn it? I was like, really?
We did that during the Butte fire.
Yeah. And they asked, why don't we collect it? And here's another question that people have asked is, why don't we take it and sell it to dispensaries? By federal law, I can't do that. So but people have asked.
I just was reading yesterday on the state's website, and they chose a $5,000 bond, and it seemed to be based on the difficulty in obtaining a bond through the normal bonding businesses. Do you know anything about that?
I know nothing about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
That's all I had. Thank you, Sheriff.
You bet.
I want to also thank you for being here this morning. I think some of my questions were already answered, but have a few others. I'm sure you're familiar with what was with Under Sheriff Macedo presented at the study session, all the concerns, because he said that was from the department. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like, have you looked at the regulation well enough, do you feel like those concerns are being addressed well enough in the regulations that are presented to us?
I've got some sticky notes here on some areas of concern. If you'd like, I can go over those.
Yes, I'd like to hear those and see how they line up with, because that might answer my questions before.
Okay. One of the concerns I had was under, let me get the section for you. I don't know what page you guys are on. It's 1795.080, sub letter K, King. I got it as page 20. If that's right, I'm not sure. It talks about the premises being fully enclosed. I know that there are setback requirements, so my question, and it's not clear to me, is, are we there?
080.
Yeah, it's 080.
It might be.
I think it's 090,
What did I miss?
and it's.
You're right, I'm sorry, it is
20 of the
090.
previous version.
It is 090. Yeah, I'm in the previous version, you're correct. I'm sorry. Again, it talks about cultivation sites being fully enclosed. My question for my staff and co-compliance staff, if we have a 100-acre grow or 100-acre property, and you have 20 acres out in the middle of it that you're allowing this grow, are you going to still require the fencing? So that when we show up to sites, we know whether they're in violation or not. It's not specific in here. It says any shall be fully enclosed. So I'm going to assume that that means any site, whether it's on a 100-acre parcel, 20 acres out in the middle, it has to be fully enclosed. That was just for clarification to make sure of that. The page after that talks about generators. And I know a lot of people in the county are off-grid. They don't have PG&E. Does that mean that when we show up to a site that's out in the middle of nowhere and they have a generator running for their house and they have generators running for their marijuana grow sites, are they going to be in violation? Because it says no generator shall be used for any cultivation activities. But if they're off-grid, are we going to be citing them for that? That puts us in a...
I believe that was the intention.
Okay, but I guess that puts us in a spot, because now they're going to stand there and say, well, my house is on a generator. I don't have power here. How am I supposed to run my grow? So just a concern, again, for when us in code compliance show up, what do we do? Because by law, they can have a generator to run their house, but yet they can't have a generator to run their grow. That, to me, doesn't make sense. And then if you go down to N, Nancy, it talks about soil and mulch amendments, pesticides, herbicides, and talks about being in full compliance with state and local laws. We need to specify who's going to take care of that. It's not the sheriff's office job, but the sheriff's office continually gets called about environmental crimes. That either needs to be sent over to Environment Health or the Ag Department. I think it needs to be specified in our ordinance so that we're not taking the heat. Letter T, Tom. And I know there was a, let me look at it here, I got the new one. It talks about no camping or sheltering except as provided in 1793 of the code, to the extent that camping or sheltering houses victims eligible for relief due to a current declared disaster. We are now 4 years into the Butte fire. Are we going to allow these people to camp and or live in whatever they're going to live in on these properties, because we still are under declaration of emergency for the Butte fire? That needs to be specified. They've had 4 years. My understanding was originally it was going to be 2 years. Now we're into 4 years, so now we have an issue when people call us and say, hey, they're camping on the site, or we show up and they're camping on site, and it was in the Butte Fire area. I would like that clarified. And the only other comment I had, and if you go to 1795.130, subsection B-boy, and this is just more for clarification, it's not so much for the sheriff's office, but it says, the current legal owners and former cultivators of a parcel, and so forth and so on. A lot of these places, the former cultivators are no longer there. I think that that should say and or, because when you're saying and the former cultivator personal containing a former cannabis cultivation site, whether or not cannabis cultivation on the site was la-di-da, it's requiring the former cultivator. If they're not around, I just think that's something that needs to be cleaned up. That was all, something that I noticed in my non-attorney form, because I am far from being an attorney. Those are the only things that I saw that stuck out in my eyes from the sheriff's office. And this realistically is a land use issue ordinance. And again, we deal with the criminal side, which is the illegal side. We will deal with the regulatory side when it comes to checking their security, if they're going to have armed guards and that type of stuff. That'll be our jobs. And to assist co-compliance if they need us to go out to a site. Other than that, I'm on the illegal side.
Thank you. Yeah, I know when under Sheriff Macedo spoke that he made it pretty clear that, you know, even though you don't deal with the regulation side, that the illegal side comes along with it and it burdens your department.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of things, you know, and I think you covered some of those that make it a little easier for you to do your job. Under the ban, has it been harder or easier to identify illegal grows?
Easier.
I'd like to hear it from the sheriff.
It's easier.
It's easy, right. That's what I thought. We hear a lot about, and there's been discussion in here about that cannabis is just like any other agricultural product. Do you think it's the same as any other, as far as your job?
Absolutely not.
So
it brings an illegal entity with it.
okay. So along that lines, for, let's say, vineyards, how many violent crimes have you had as a result of the vineyards in the county?
I don't have an answer for you. I don't know.
How many violent crimes as a result of the cattle industry?
Again, I don't know.
How many violent crimes as a result of logging
Again, I don't know.
or any other agricultural?
I don't know.
How many of these other agricultural things do require an armed, uniformed security guard on site?
None that I'm aware of at this point in time.
So we're looking at something that's kind of different. This really isn't the same.
It is different, but like I said before, it's any, I mean, you have cattle rustling, that goes on still today.
But you've had a lot of that in this county?
We've had some, not a whole bunch, but we've had some. We've had beehives stolen, that's part of agriculture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anytime people can do something illegal and they can make money off of it, that's why we have jobs.
But I mean numbers-wise.
Pardon me?
I mean numbers-wise. So
The numbers are
you're saying
lower.
that's equal to cannabis?
The numbers are lower. Marijuana brings an entity, like I said before, of illegality. It does bring a different entity in.
Do you receive a lot of the complaints about odor? Does that come through the sheriff's department?
Yeah, even during the urgency ordinance, yeah, there was a lot of complaints about odor.
Again, do you receive a lot of those similar complaints because of other agricultural activity?
We don't. Sheriff's office does not. Maybe animal services does, but we do not.
Okay, so we really are dealing with something that's much different.
It is.
Did you get an opportunity to read or did you hear from the Surgeon General the new advisory on marijuana?
I did not.
The Surgeon General came out with a new advisory and shared the concern that this should not be allowed, any adolescent should not be allowed to use cannabis along with pregnant women because of the effect on the adolescent brain development. In this ordinance here, we're supposed to set back sites from any sensitive use areas, and I kind of concerned that one of them that's not in there is like bus stops. You think children should be within 1,000 feet of a cannabis grow if they're waiting for the bus? I mean, you think 75 feet?
Well, I think we
is far
addressed
enough?
that during the urgency ordinance. We had some bus stops where there was some grows that were going on, and we shut them down because it is still considered a sensitive use area if a juvenile can be at a school bus stop, or whether it's a transit bus stop. If children use it, it's still considered a sensitive use.
It's not addressed in these regulations, so.
Well, but we did shut down some sites because of that. So it is possible for us to tell the person, look, you're in a sensitive use area, you cannot grow. And again, that would go back to the planning department to look to see if there's going to be a bus stop there and whether children are going to be congregating there or not.
And also, my understanding, I believe you met with the Bureau of Cannabis Control.
I did.
You had a meeting with them. And I had some notes from that, because it came out of that meeting, they said it was very critical. They were very critical of the $5,000 bond for potential cleanup. They said it was too low and felt a $1 million or possibly $2 million would ensure the property involved would not become a burden to the county. Does that sound?
I don't remember. I remember the first part, just them saying it was too low. I don't remember them giving a number.
And then they also said, they repeated over and over, that the state does not have the manpower, nor will they provide financial resources through their fines to assist the county. Does that sound?
That is correct.
Yeah, because I think also when they had, there was a big cannabis meeting with the state, and they said the same thing, the state's not coming to help you.
Correct. Yeah, that's been all along. The feds aren't here to help us, nor is the state. It falls upon us. And that is, well, I'll talk to the board about that.
I think that's all I have. Thank you.
You bet.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm clear, most of your time is spent with illegal grows, correct?
Probably 98% of it. Well, 100% of it right now, because we don't have anything going on, so yes.
During the urgency ordinance, what was the most common size of an illegal grow? Was they as large as the regulated grows during that time?
Yeah, I would say that even then, I think that the average size was still that 22,000 square feet. Again, I think they were doing that because they're trying to, hide in plain sight. And if you don't have a 1 acre grow site, well, the sheriff's office might just fly over and say it's just another site. So I didn't see any. We saw some that were exuberantly large, but not for the most part. They were all pretty much within the parameters of the urgency ordinance.
But if they was designated, somebody had a designated site, it would, you would be easier to find, a registered site, and you stumbled upon another site that wasn't registered, it would be easily to assume that that was an illegal grow, correct? So if you had a registered site and you know the location of it.
Right.
And you're driving down the road past it, flying over it, and then right beside it was another one, it would probably be pretty easy to designate which one was.
Yeah, we actually were able to do that through the overflights that we had. And we had the APN, so we knew, and then we could use GPS coordinates. So we knew if, Bob over here had a legal grow site and Billy over here didn't, we pretty much knew Billy was illegal. And I will say that the registered growers helped us.
That was going to be my next question. If the registered people doing it legitimately would turn in the illegitimate.
Yeah, they would do it on the down low, obviously, and
Well,
I
yeah.
understand why, but I know for a fact that a lot of registered growers turned in a lot of the folks that were illegal.
Okay, and do you think, just in your honest opinion, do you think over time, say that this ordinance did go in, and regulations, in effect, would you believe there would be a downturn over time of illegal grows, such as the alcohol? I'm sure how many stills have you have you shut down up here in the hills?
Well, we haven't caught anybody yet.
So over time, do you think that in correlation, I mean,
Realistically, yeah, probably over time, but I don't know what that time frame is. I don't know if it's a year, or 10 years, or 100 years. You know, it's, again, there is still such a black market out there. I don't see the downturn coming anytime soon. I know, and growers can probably tell you better than I, but right now, my understanding is marijuana is going for about $800 a pound out here. And if you take it to Florida, you're going to get, you know, well, after the hurricane, probably $5,000. So there is a huge difference in cost. And I think that's why the illegal growers are growing so much in California, because they're making so much money by shipping it out. And I think that's part of the conversation that we're going to have with Governor Newsom, is to try and resolve that problem, because they're not seeing the amount of taxes that they thought they were going to see, because the illicit side is still there.
I'm subscribed to your website or your notifications, and one came across yesterday, and I get the notifications on my phone and stuff from the Sheriff's Department. Is it true that most of the legal growers are from out of state, or not from this area?
The illegal growers?
Yes.
Yeah, there's the higher percentages, they're from out of the area altogether, yeah. Again, we had quite a few that were residents of the county that started growing after the Butte fire, like they did. They went through the urgency ordinance, and whether they were approved or if they weren't approved, there was a certain percentage of them that did continue to grow. And even since we've had the ban, we've had a certain percentage that were registered growers that continued to grow, and we caught them. So, I mean, again, it's back to the, you know, they can make money, so the ones that don't care are going to grow, whether you have regulations or not.
And that's going to keep you in a job, correct?
And that keeps me employed.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Well, I think there's one thing, and you bring this, you're the personification of this. The one thing that everybody in this room can agree with is that we really commend you for your action on getting rid of illegal grows. That's something that everyone in this room can agree with, unless we have a few illegal growers just coming in to listen.
Well, I'll tell you, Commissioner Laddish, if you can get the Board of Supervisors to give me another 10 guys, we can do more.
Well, and that brings me, that brings me to the question of, Measure C was helping you in funding your actions against the illegal growers. In any respect, or is that still, do you still have the benefit of Measure C funds in your enforcement actions?
Well, I get my money from the general fund.
Right.
And I had a couple people tell me that the county was laundering money for me by using Measure C and giving it to me for marijuana eradications. So it all depends on how you want to look at it. I get money from the general fund, and I told the board back then, whether you get Measure C passed or whether you don't, you're going to fund the sheriff's office to clean up the illegal growers. If you have registered growers, great. If you have illegal growers, we're still going to deal with that. So that would be a question for our CAO to say, does Measure C tax money help the budget?
Well, let's put it this way. If suddenly there was an infusion of cash into the Measure C funds, would you think that was probably a positive development?
That would probably help the sheriff's office in illegal grows, yes.
All right, thank you. Now, in talking about the bonds, of course, in dealing with illegal grows, the bonds are irrelevant because the bonds are only things that are applied to legal grows, correct?
Correct, Ed, and that's actually a very valid point. We're, again, not going after I mean, if you have a registered grower, again, that is, that they find that is out of compliance, code compliance is probably going to be going in and citing them for that. There'll be fines associated to that. If they eradicate the plants through our 806 ordinance, there's going to be fines associated to that. The sheriff's office is probably not going to be dealing with that. because it's done through code compliance. Again, we're dealing with the regular, or the illegal, non-regulatory.
So the
compliance.
question of the amount of the bond, and I share the question as to whether $5,000 is sufficient in this ordinance, but that's not the sort of eradication that you're dealing with. in this
Again,
case.
you're absolutely correct. That would be more a question for code compliance and planning and the entities that are going to be doing the registered sites. So as far as the sheriff's office, it's actually, I never thought about it, a very valid point, that the bond doesn't affect the sheriff's office because we're dealing with the illegal grows.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. Next.
Yeah. I actually had a couple of questions. How often do you see illegal grows taking place on property where the landowners don't know anything about it?
That's a hard question to answer for the simple fact that we have some landowners that live out of the area, and when we send them letters or we do an eradication there, they go, oh, geez, we didn't know. Whether they did or not, we have no way of proving that. So I don't know that I can give you an honest answer.
So do you believe that more aggressive enforcement of liens on property would reduce that at all? Do you think I mean, you don't know, do they know about it or do they not about it?
Well, I've talked to...
Because my concern is the same thing, that the bond only matters if you have a legal grower. How do we pay for the cost of cleanup for these illegal grows?
That I don't know. I know I've talked to counsel, and he said that even if the property owner does not know that they have a grow on their site, the county can go after them. So that would be a question for counsel.
So what do you see as a deterrent to illegal grows if we were to have a regulatory ordinance? I mean, other than aggressive enforcement.
More cops.
Right. So I'm really encouraged in the last year to see maybe it's just better publicity, but we're really seeing much more enforcement that I wish we would have seen early on during the urgency ordinance. And I know there's a resource issue.
Well, there's a couple parts of that question, and I go back to what Sabrina said earlier, is that lessons learned. We've learned how to do things. We learned how things occur. We've learned our search warrants are getting done faster. Barbara Yook our DA has assigned a DA investigator to review our search warrants. And that's an issue that Barbara and I have, and that we'll take up with the board, that she's not being compensated for that person doing nothing but marijuana, and that's a huge issue for her house. But that ability to move our search warrants along faster has helped. The fact that HR has supported the sheriff's office and we've been able to hire more employees for quite a bit of time here during the urgency ordinance. I was running with 2, maybe 3 guys in the MET team. Now I'm fully staffed in the MET team, which is 4, but it's better, so that's 1 more search warrant that we're able to do per week, hence the 4 to 8. So it's a combination of a lot of things. We've started utilizing equipment, getting ready to, and don't tell the supervisors, but I'm getting ready to buy a Bobcat so that we can do our own eradications and not have to rely on contractors. With the new ordinance, the contractor, co-compliance is going to have a contract with that same contractor. And just so people know, we've only had 1 contractor bid on doing eradications in 3 years. It makes it difficult. So I'm going to buy a piece of equipment that my folks can operate so that we're not waiting for the contractor or trying to eradicate these illegal sites by hand. So we've been able to move things along faster by using, equipment as opposed to cutting them down by hand. So there's a lot of things that have changed, and that's why you see our numbers going up. 2016 was a big year because we had Operation Terminus, if you remember that, and we had over 104 or 5 people from outside agencies come to help us do those big sites, and they were huge sites. You know, we're talking acres and acres. So a lot of things have changed for us, lessons learned on how to do things. So it's going to get better.
So would co-location on a larger site, the multiple permittees on a single site, be helpful to you?
Yes, and we talked about this before, and yes, they would, for the simple fact that now, when we fly over a site, we know that this is a registered site here, but yet now we have this site over here that is not supposed to be there. And it's going to make it easier for code compliance too, because now they go to one property to view multiple sites. So in essence, yeah, I understand there's concerns over water and everything else, but that's not my department. But as far as convenience for us and for code compliance, yes.
I was wondering about the waste disposal issue, actually. That seems like that's a problem if you have to take it to the landfill.
Oh, you mean the waste disposal? Are you
Well,
talking about the marijuana?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that it's a problem. You got to understand, and if you took and you pile up a big pile of marijuana right here in the middle of this floor, and you sprinkled some water on it, and you covered it with some Visqueen, and with it being hot outside, within about 20 minutes, that stuff is mush. So when you put it in the ground, it's going to compact. You're going to lose some room. But the grow I was telling you about today, they'll load that stuff into a 40-yard dumpster, and by the time we put it in the ground, it'll probably fit in the back of a pickup. So it does compact down quite a bit. It's got a lot of moisture in it. So it does take up space in the landfill, but it's not like putting, drums of plastic and steel in the landfill. It does take up some space, so I don't know that it's a huge impact, but it still is an impact.
Just thinking our landfill's running out of room.
It is, it is, but I don't know that that's a major impact to the landfill.
Not
But it's time. Now you have county employees digging holes so that we can bury it. We have to stand there and wait because we don't just dump it and leave. We make sure that it's secure. And they dig it to about, so everybody knows, it's about a 6-foot deep hole, so it's going to take you a while to dig down and get to it. So it's...
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Does anybody have
Sure.
any follow-up questions?
No.
Thank you, Chair.
You
Thanks
bet.
again. I think it's time for a brief break. So 10 minutes.
Right.
Robert, no T, Robert. Robert. Thanks for bringing that in.
Get this show on the road. You guys ready? Oh, yeah. If everybody could please take a seat. Sure, thank you. We're ready to get started again. If everyone could please find a seat. Thank you. So I understand we have a representative from the Environmental Management Agency here. If any of the commissioners have any questions.
Not from me.
Nope.
Nope, not right now. Thank you. Okay, are we ready to start taking up the ordinance again? Do any of the commissioners have any comments on the first portion of the ordinance that we reviewed a couple of weeks ago? Corrections or questions on changes that were made?
We do have some new comments from Commissioner Laddish,
Yes.
and I think we should start there because it's sort of at the beginning.
Yep.
And then just go from there.
Would you like to get started, Tim?
Sure. First, on 1795.020 LLL, security fencing definition, I think we did agree that it should say at least 6 feet in height, and the at least, you can make it in there. Okay, yeah, at least 6 feet in height for the fencing.
He's got it.
I heard you said, is that the majority of the commission's desire to
Yes.
have that at least?
Yes.
And then on 17.95.030F, on page 10, this is something that we discussed. I don't think there was any disagreement on, but I think it might be good to clarify that before anybody requires a surveyor to come in and survey the premises or the cultivation site, that at least we should put into the ordinance, if the county and the applicant permittee do not readily agree as to a boundary question, then the burden of proof is at least using the surveyor. It's just a common sense thing, but I think it might be good to have it in there before. For the
Well, I
future.
I think it goes without saying. If they have an agreement, the issue doesn't come up.
It should go without saying. That's the question of whether or not in the future at some point, somebody's going to say, no, every time we are looking at a cultivation site, we need to bring in a surveyor. I just think it might be good to,
Well, that raises an issue, whether somebody could then argue the county didn't negotiate in good faith to agree or not. And to me, it clouds the matter. I would not do it.
anybody else?
I actually agree with Tim on this one. If it's obvious that the requirements are met, I think it should be in there. They shouldn't have to be surveyed if it is obvious.
So I believe the discussion at our previous meeting was that if it's obvious, there is no need for a surveyor. The question really is if the wording is clear on that now. I thought maybe it could say something like, in the event that the premise and property boundaries cannot easily be determined, the burden of proof will be on the, whatever we're calling them, the permittee, to hire a surveyor to establish those. I think it needs to be more clear that this isn't something that needs to be done every time.
Why not just say, in the event of a dispute,
Yes, great.
That's fine.
right at the beginning of the last sentence?
Is that,
At the end of the last sentence? or
At the beginning of the last sentence.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
okay? Then, one thing that we just didn't consider was as far as the outdoor, non-commercial cannabis cultivation sites, we took care of making sure the lighting was blocked for indoor, non-commercial cannabis cultivation sites, but I think we should have a provision for the outdoor sites that refers to the lighting requirements of 17.95.090M, and that basically is that the light, any lights will be directed downward and inward. It will not, no direct rays will be going outside of the parcel. And so that's why I would suggest that we put in that reference to 17.95.09 OM.
Well, on this subject, I don't recall whether there was actually a consensus of the majority of the board to allow non-commercial outdoor grows. And I'm pretty sure there was a question about the setback if we were
There was.
going to do it.
Yeah, and I'm just preserving whatever questions we have, and I'd like to preserve the question about the setback until we deal with the commercial setbacks, because I've got a very specific suggestion later on about the commercial setbacks, and then I would tie this provision on the setbacks to that. This is, right now, all I'm raising is the question of the lighting, and I just didn't want the lighting to bleed over into the neighbor's property.
So I don't believe that lighting is a comfortable fit in that sentence. It feels out of place. If we wanted to create a parallel sentence for outdoor lighting, I think you'd also want to just do something similar to the item 3, where we talk about all the other things, because obviously you have to comply with all the requirements.
Outdoor lighting, though, for an
Outdoor non-commercial.
non-commercial grow, I mean, it's, that defeats the purpose. The lighting, I mean, the outdoor grow is, wouldn't, in my mind, use lighting.
No, it wouldn't be for growth. This provision I'm referring to refers to the security lighting.
I don't think
If you're
people
gonna go
would
out
be
at
having dusk to dawn lights sitting over their plants. I mean, it'd be probably a porch light or something like that, I would imagine, from the comments I've received.
For the commercial grows, we have provisions for the
So
cultivation lighting and for the security, or making sure you don't trip and fall on your face
Yeah,
lighting.
absolutely.
And that's what this
I
would
think
be
we're
taking care
getting hung up again on a minor point here, which is for the non-commercial 6-plant issue, which we do need to preserve the question of the 75 feet that there was no consensus on. But I don't believe we need a special lighting comment in this item, because it's on residential property. You have to be living there. You have to comply with the same lighting requirements that we have elsewhere, as soon as we get that dark sky ordinance in place. So
I don't need to take up any more time on this if
it's just,
there's no consensus.
why pull lighting out? Okay,
Okay, so
next.
take out that first thing. Now, we may have discussed this last time, the idea about not contiguously owned or leased. The idea of whatever setbacks we come up with should not apply as the draft ordinance exists if you have contiguously owned properties. You don't have to worry about the setback as between those two properties. And my suggestion, and it recurs these several times during this, is that we should have the same treatment if they are contiguously leased properties. The staff is indicating that they think, well, a lease can end. Well, my point is a sale can be made of the contiguous property, and so maybe I'm missing a point, Peter, as to the distinction between the sales and the leases.
I have something to add to this. I don't believe that the lease needs to be here because we're talking about 6 plants. Whereas if there is a commercial grow, you have a different situation. Leased might be part of that because they have made an investment in developing a piece of property and they need to preserve their clearances. Move your 6 plants.
So the reason why we kept it at owned rather than owned or leased was along the lines of what Chair Plotnick had suggested, but also we don't require a permit. And so we're not reviewing the lease agreements and the information that you would have with a commercial permit to that same degree. And so it just seemed like, let's just keep it to own. That way it's very clear. You're absolutely right. Someone could sell the property, and at that point in time, then they'd have to move the plants.
Okay, for outdoor, non-commercial, I see your point. Unless somebody else wants to take up the cause, I can do without the or least, but I want to preserve the right to, or the point to be made in other contexts. Okay, so that one stays the same.
Well, before you continue on,
Sure.
as I said earlier, I'm not sure we had a consensus of a majority of the commissioners to allow non-commercial outdoor grows. I would only add to that discussion that San Joaquin County does not allow outdoor personal grows with an ordinance enacted August 7th of 2018. My view is we should do the same.
We did not have consensus, and I thought we would circle back to that at the very end if we've managed to get consensus elsewhere.
There's one aspect of that is that if we restrict outdoor non-commercial grows, but to a great degree, but still permit some, at least as of 2 years ago, it made a big difference as to whether we would be getting any share of state cannabis taxes. And I don't know if that is still the case or not, but it's something to be considered.
This is non-commercial only that we're talking
Yes,
about in this.
I know,
item.
it is. That's what I'm saying, is that at that point, the Planning Commission's regulatory ordinance permitted some non-commercial grows outdoors, and as long as we permitted some, why we were going to be getting a share of the state cannabis taxes. That's, for our future discussion, that's something to keep in mind. Okay.
So we're going to table this for now?
Or we can poll the commission again and see if there's any kind of consensus for whether we should allow outdoor at all.
I think let my feeling be known as absolutely not in any rural residential areas. There should be no outdoor grows.
Okay.
That would be my position.
You brought up San Joaquin. I'm going to bring up a comment that somebody said. Amador County, however, does allow outdoor grows, and I believe that outdoor personal grows should be allowed.
And I would like to put things off until we've talked through the setbacks for the commercial grows, and also circle around and come back to this, but I think some outdoor personal grows should be allowed. I mean, if we just, in the middle of a 50-acre parcel to have 6 plants out there would probably not bring the end of the earth, but we need to decide just how much we want to restrict these. And I think that question is better discussed when we're actually talking about the restriction we put on the commercial grows outdoor.
Yeah, I agree. We should allow outdoor commercial, non-commercial grows on large parcels. But we'll come back to the setbacks.
Okay, so I'll move on here. Then 17.95.050D7 on page 15. I think we need to make it very clear that the fact that somebody has been issued a citation is not determinative as to whether or not they qualify for a permit. It's whether that citation has survived enforcement proceedings. And so I'm trying to just clarify a provision that was already in that subdivision that so that a person or entity who received the citation was exonerated either administratively, quasi-judicially, or through a decision of a court. So any court, including courts of appeal, et cetera, would not have the fact that the citation was issued be held against him or her or it. This is just a clarification.
I have a question about the definition of a citation. I mean, is a citation going to be issued for something relatively minor, which would put somebody's license at risk?
Seeing Sabrina is not here, citations are only issued after, in the case of ordinary code compliance violations, after the person has received a notice of violation and an opportunity to correct.
Correct.
The citation is what starts fines being issued, and that's the decision that's appealable to the county hearing board.
So I would support Tim's language. I think if the citation doesn't survive the hearing, it shouldn't count against them.
Doesn't it say that here? It says the subsection does not apply if the person or entity who received the citation was exonerated through a decision of the county hearing officer or superior court. Why we got to say something similar twice?
Well, the reason I made that broader is that, okay, superior court decides against the person, he appeals it to the appellate court, and the citation goes away. The language should encompass all the various ways that a citation could not survive the procedure.
I think the intent is the same either way.
Yeah.
What does quasi-judicially mean in this context? And what are we talking about?
I think the hearing officer is a quasi-judicial procedure.
And administratively would be what, if code compliance changes its mind, or?
Or the planning director or whatever, whoever has authority to change his mind. That's my intention. If you can make it clearer, that's fine.
So if you had a situation where the citation was issued, the matter went to a hearing officer, and then the person who received the citation complied with whatever requirements there were, and the hearing was then vacated, then this section would cover that. This exception, I guess, would cover that.
I think so.
I think I'm okay with this.
Okay?
Anybody else? Okay, let's move on.
So, Peter, I think we're in agreement on that one.
Okay, yes.
Okay, now, I just wanted to raise this. This is 17.95.050D15 on page 15. And this is a section that says that an applicant who qualifies in every other respect can only get the number of permits that he had, or she had, or it had before. And I just wanted to raise the question of, do we want to open that up in any respect? Do we want to set a particular number? Do we want to permit a person to hold several permits in that person's own name instead of having to do separate corporate entities for those permits? I just wanted to raise the question.
I have a question about it from a little different perspective in that we're relying on a previous system to set the number, and I'm wondering if it wouldn't be simpler and more direct to rely on that only the folks who were in compliance previously had a license are able to even apply this time, and then maybe limit them to a number of permits
Yeah, that's the question I'm raising.
under this.
Well,
It
that's
just
the
seems
intent of this
convoluted.
provision, and it was intended to minimize the number of permits that could be applied for. I know that in some instances, there is a desire to, or in other jurisdictions, there are cultivators who have multiple permits, and that's allowed in those jurisdictions. The direction of the board was to essentially try to respond to the cultivation industry that had permits, wanted to allow those permits to be reinstated, essentially. And so if we're trying to limit to what, those permits that were previously issued and had state licenses, it doesn't make much sense to say, well, you can have, an increased number of permits. We have also relied upon this provision in the addendum to have that limitation, because otherwise I think there would be a fair argument that if we open it up to more, then that has other ramifications that we haven't really looked at. So
So a can of worms is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
yes, it would be.
And
I
because-
withdraw my can of worms, but just for clarification, a person who had, it's possible that under the urgency ordinance, one person could form several corporations, and each of those could have had a permit. Is that correct?
That's true.
Okay. So it's basically following the wishes of the Board of Supervisors, just hold it the way it is.
Yes.
Okay, that's okay with me.
Yeah, I'd love to simplify it, but I don't know that it's my hill to die on today. Everybody else okay with that?
And that would bring us up to 060. And I could keep going if you want.
Well, I had a question on 060B8, which specifies an application fee, but it doesn't say who determines it or how much it's going to be. And maybe everybody else in this room but me knows that. I don't.
That opens a whole nother can of worms for me.
Well, fees are established by the Board of Supervisors
Right.
under a separate code provision. They're adopted by resolution. We could state that, but it would be just restating what's already in code.
And I understand there will be a fee study. So should it say that there will be a non-refundable application fee? But I assume there's going to be a license fee, a renewal fee in subsequent years, all sorts of fees. Is an application fee the first year going to be the same fee that a renewal fee would be, or is that all going to be dealt with in this fee study?
That will be dealt with in the fee study and ultimately fee resolution going to the Board of Supervisors. We need to look at what are the costs of that. We can't charge more than what it costs us to process the applications.
Commissioner Rooster, do you think we should say an application fee as determined by the Board of Supervisors?
No, I think based on the discussion here, now everybody in this room, including me, knows how it works. So we can leave it the way it is.
So I have these questions about the greenhouse gas emissions offsets. And at the last meeting, this is the B11 of 060. Our last meeting, basically, we were told that this is a very technical thing, and and for people to determine what their fee is, or their greenhouse gas emission requirement would be, they'll have to hire an expert to find out. And I can see where that may be the case, but as of now, we really have no idea how burdensome this greenhouse gas requirement is. So that's why I have asked certain questions, like where did this requirement come from?
This was a mitigation measure from the environmental impact report. And it identified that potential for greenhouse gases is there, significant. This measure would reduce that level to less than significant. I
And
don't have...
what's the standard for less than significant when you're talking about greenhouse gases?
Essentially, it's net neutral.
Oh. Okay, but then is there any other industry or agricultural activity that's required to meet this standard?
I'm not aware of any agricultural activities required to meet that standard. I'm sure there are other industries that are required to...
Well, I mean,
do
within the
carbon
county.
offsets. None that are regulated by the county that I'm aware of. Or we don't have this provision for any other county type of permit.
And do we know where the consultant got this? How do we know it's going to, how do we know it's going to be a greenhouse gas neutral result? Or
Well, there's quite a bit of information at the state level to direct the reduction of greenhouse gases. And there's a whole state agency that's involved in developing these programs. And this is where this information, the Air Resources Board, has developed these programs and operates or has certified various essentially mitigation banks, the whole offset program. Now you can meet it by either saying, okay, I'm going to install solar panels, for example, to power my pump and operate things. So we can different ways to reduce the effect of greenhouse gases. I'm not an expert on that. I relied on the experts of our consultants that we had to develop this, and I'm sure they worked with various state agencies to ensure that this is a program that would work.
So in subsection A, when it talks about evidence of a reduction or a reduction equivalent, reduction from what?
Well, yeah, and it
What's our baseline?
gives you a total amount, 17.2 metric tons, and then it says calculated specific to the premises, but it's already telling you it's 17.2 metric tons in one case and 17.2 plus 11.3 in the other. So it seems that the wording is not clear as to what the intention really is here. I did notice, I did a quick scan of the state's legislation, and it says, I think it's 2023, they are actually going to be mandating this kind of thing in excruciating detail how that will happen. So I understand the need to have it in here if we're going to rely on mitigation measures from our existing environmental documents. I'm just not sure if the wording is getting us where we want to be, or what the cost and burden, as Tim said, of doing this would be. The photovoltaic panels at least provide some ongoing benefit. If you're just buying carbon offsets like you do for your plane trip, I'm not sure that that's really serving the long-term purpose.
Not to mention it's a plant, and just by the nature of the plant photosynthesis, that should be an offset as well, correct? Or is that calculated in with that?
Well, that would be part of the
That's a
whole
different
calculation,
thing.
how much existing vegetation is removed, how much carbon offset would be created, by the production of the plant itself, what kind of equipment are you using, what power source do you have? All of that would be plugged into the model that is required under 11A. And then, well, I won't speculate on where the 17.2, that was calculated by the consultants.
You get the gist of what the consultant has in mind, but here we are recommending to the Board of Supervisors to enact something that we don't understand. And when it's asking for a reduction or a reduction equivalent, and we don't know what reduction from what, and when we're talking about an initial offset, and we don't know it's an initial offset of what, from what, it just, as in our quasi-legislative mode, I'm uncomfortable. That I don't know what I'm enacting. I think maybe it's a good idea. Certainly I'm in favor of a reduction in greenhouse gases, but there's certain requirements for clarity of the law that I just can't, I haven't been able to wrap my mind around this. Do we know how much, at this point, how expensive per metric ton of CO2e?
Off the top of my head, I do not. I do have some information back in my office, and if you'd like, and maybe we can get the air pollution control specialist in here, and
Well, that
maybe
might
after
be-
lunch, if Dr.
Yeah, that would be
available,
helpful.
to maybe explain this in a manner better than I could.
That'd be fine, and I'm glad to cut off our discussion of it right now if we can get somebody
If we
who
can
might
sit back after
understand.
lunch, maybe that would be good.
I believe these numbers all come right out of the EIR.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would be in 3220, mitigation measures 32-3. It's all spelled out in there, and the numbers match up with what we have here. So what we're
Yeah, we
trying to
just
do is
don't know where
comply
they
with the
got it
EIR.
Where they
Well,
have it.
but that's what we hired consultants for.
Well,
It's not
but
our
then-
job to question
Yeah.
the consultants and then change, because we're supposed to make sure this meets the EIR.
I
Not sit and have a discussion, say, well, we don't like this, so we're going to throw it
Right,
out.
we don't know if we like it or not, that's the question,
Well,
we
that's
don't
the question
understand it. I have a couple other things, which is the whole question of clearing of trees, carbon sequestering, long-term planting for the purposes of a shorter-term crop. Seems like something we would want to prevent, and I'm not sure how that's figured into this ordinance anywhere. So certainly if you were removing timberlands or oak woodlands for the purposes of creating a place to grow, which we would hope wouldn't need to happen, you'd need to offset that also.
Yes, that would be part of the calculation.
Yeah, and we probably don't want to see it at all. We'd like you to find a more appropriate spot on your property, but, so maybe we could talk to them.
Okay, anyhow, I'm glad to defer this until we get some more expertise.
And I think that you brought up a good point about clearing, because that also then again points out a problem with what we have with the EIR. It was based on a much smaller canopy size. So now we're doubling that, that's twice the clearing. Has that been factored in the EIR?
Well, the increase in cultivation area was looked at in total, not just by individual sites, because of the reduction in the numbers versus what was analyzed. The overall amount of potential clearing was less than what was analyzed in the EIR. Even though it's on a
another
case-by-case
assumption.
basis, it could be increased, but the total number is still significantly less than what was analyzed in the EIR. So it looked at 750 outdoor cultivation areas at a potential of half acre apiece. And now we're looking at a maximum 190 at a maximum of an acre apiece. So it's still less. It's
Less than half.
I think it's around 55% or something like that.
Okay.
My next has to do with 17.95060C. Anybody
Yeah.
step in before that?
Nope, that's my next one.
Okay, and so my suggested change in the wording is really the same result, but it's making it clear that as soon as practicable after the effective date of the commercial cannabis application fee, the applications will be accepted. It's a matter of moving the train along once this effective date of the cannabis application fee is happening. The way the section was drafted beforehand was that the permits will not be accepted until after the effective date, and this just makes it that the permits will be accepted as soon as practicable after the effective date. Any problem with that?
Well, I'm concerned about the indefiniteness, is that the word, of that. Who's to determine whether it's practicable? You know, we have a legal responsibility to process applications. And if I'm busy with other stuff, well, it's not practical for me to accept that application. I'm not sure what kind of legal impact that might have on the county. I think that, you know, establishing a firm date is clear to everyone. You know, if someone spends the time and effort to develop an application, and because that would ultimately be my determination as to whether it's practicable or not, because my department would be the one accepting those. And then for me to just say, it's not practical for me to take that in right now. There's no guidelines, there's no standards of what's practicable.
Well, can we just say that it shall be begun to be accepted within 2 weeks after the application fee? I mean, put
I
it that
suppose
way.
we could establish any date that you think is appropriate. It should be tied to something that makes sense, and, you know, the concern we had here was that normally an ordinance becomes effective in 30 days, but a fee does not become effective for 60 days. So if we adopt the ordinance the same date as the fee, there would be a 30-day window that we would have no fee in place, and we definitely need to be able to collect the fee to, you know, support the program. And so that was the point of this, was so that the fee would be established at the time that we start collecting applications. If there is a rational reason to extend it beyond that time, you know, that might make sense, but I don't know what that would be. And I don't know the legal ramifications of that.
I didn't want you to have if the application fee became effective on Saturday, I didn't expect you to come into the office and collect applications. You know, I mean, I know the usual thing.
In that event, it's always, if something falls on a weekend, it's always the following Monday.
But I guess with anything where we're relying upon the planning director, it's very easy for us to say, well, Peter will do the right thing. But once you retire, I don't know who's going to be there. So if we wanted to have some sort of obligation that the planning director won't be sitting around and waiting for a month before starting to accept applications, and that was the point of my attempted change. So we could, if you think it's reasonable to say that applications will begin to be accepted within a week, 10 days, whatever, after the effective date, be happy to put it that way.
Why are we changing it from what's proposed?
Because what was
Because
proposed
you're
is-
trying to encourage a prompt
Yes,
acceptance of applications.
right, exactly.
I think it ought to stay the way it is.
I do too.
I think if we monkey with this, it's just asking for difficulties.
I would agree.
I would agree.
Well, I don't think we need to talk about it any further. Okay,
I had a question on E, right below that, as well, because the site, evidence site inspection be conducted by an enforcement official resulting in finding. What's the time frame on that?
I'm sorry.
On E, the same,
You're in the-
Same
you're in the
page.
next section.
We're on 07.
07,
Yeah.
Okay, well, okay.
so right below it. On E, I mean, what's the site inspection conducted by, what's the time frame given, or should there be a time frame given for that? It's under the same kind of type of question that
yeah,
I
Mr.
think
Lash
the-
is bringing up.
The problem with putting timeframes on this is we don't know how many applications are going to come in, what the staffing requirements are going to be to meet those timeframes. By putting a timeframe, we put them in a position that they may not have the staff to meet that timeframe, and then what's going to happen? I think, we need to be careful about that because they already let us know they are short-staffed.
I understand that,
And
but
we're hoping that they're going to get more staff once this gets started, but you put a time frame in there before they get any new staffing, you're putting them where they're going to have to pull people from other projects and things that might be more important to the county in order to process this stuff, because they don't yet have the staffing to do that. Now, I'd be very concerned about doing that.
I know in other planning issues, once an application is deemed complete, you have a period of time to review it, usually 60 days. And if no action gets taken, then it's deemed
Well, there are Permit Streamlining Act provisions that apply to any application that's submitted, land use application. I would assume that the same provisions apply here. We have a certain time frame to deem it complete. We need to make inspections. We need to coordinate with other departments. I would agree with Commissioner Fiorino that, having an arbitrary deadline on it may or may not, we may not be able to meet that, and then what's the ramifications of that, not being able to meet that? Does it mean it's automatically approved, or we don't get to do the site inspection? This is what we need to do, and we, like with any other application, we go through a process to ensure that it's in compliance, and we try to do that, as timely a manner as we can, given the resources that we have. The whole purpose of the fee study and that the CAO is spearheading is to make sure that we have sufficient staff to conduct this program and have staff on board. And so we will have essentially 60 days to try to develop that program before the first applications start coming in. So, we're looking right now at what we need to make this program work. And, all of these steps, all these things we need to do is just like any other parcel map, a use permit. We're going to review it. We're going to go out to the site. We're going to make sure that the application material conforms to our codes and requirements. And then if all's a go, then we can issue the permit and they can take the next steps. But part of that will be doing a site inspection. And this is somewhat unique in that we're looking at, for example, the previous history of the site. Or if they're relocating from one site to another, we have to go inspect that old site to make sure that they have complied with the remediation requirements. So we'll be doing that to ensure compliance with the ordinance. We're not going to just arbitrarily sit on it, just to stall it, but we will process them in a timely manner in the order that they came in. If we get a rush in, maybe a bit of a backlog, we'll work through that. We don't anticipate the same problem that we had with the urgency ordinance, just because of the nature of what we're dealing with here compared to that. But, there's going to be some time that we're going to need to process those applications. And I hope the cultivation industry knows that, they're not going to get a week turnaround on these permits. They're going to submit an application, we'll go through a similar process with any other land use application.
And do I understand from what you said at the beginning of your response, that there is an overall permit review ordinance or statute that
There's a statute.
that requires
state statute,
certain standards?
Yes, state statute, the Permit Streamlining Act,
So that-
as well as other provisions of government code that has certain timelines in there.
So that there could be, there are legal requirements of certain standards being met to keep something like this moving along?
Yes.
Okay. Does that take care of it?
Yeah, that takes care of it for me, as long as it doesn't stagnate. That's what I'm concerned about, people are paying money for this. If this ordinance does go through and it could be 18 months or 2 years, I mean, how long could it actually be? And that's my concern. I understand there's going to be a backlog and that stuff, but as long as it's expedited in the orderly, timeline, I don't see an issue with it.
And I would go back to the subsection D right before that.
Same.
Yeah, I want to go back even further.
Okay, great.
I want to go back to C. We somehow, the $5,000 bond, I believe that mimics the state bond amount, but it's also what the Board of Supervisors directed.
Yes, that's correct.
So do we want to dare to modify that number?
Well, we've
Based on what
heard
we
from
heard
people,
earlier.
we've heard from people that deal with this, it is not enough. And I understand that you can have a lien on the property, but what that's worth depends on the property.
But that is, the sheriff was talking about illegal growth, and we're talking about the total eradication of the entire crop. And he recognized that he's not dealing with a bond situation. And the question, I found it very informative, what Ethan was saying earlier, is that this can become a super lien on the property, which is, I think, a real strong consideration for that effectively we will be able to do what the object of this bond is. And the question is whether these bonds are even available at higher amounts. Are we dealing with the question of whether, if we required a bond of $15,000, are we basically saying we might as well give up on the regulatory program?
Well, you can always put up a savings account as your bond. People do it for public works projects all the time. You don't have to buy a bond through a commercial. So,
Well, yes, you may have a super lien on the property. That means you have to foreclose that lien. It takes time to collect it.
yeah.
Some properties are not going to be worth the cleanup costs if that's really what we're worried about more than anything else. And it seems to me that what we ought to be doing here is protecting the county from coming up short on a cleanup. And it seems to me that a bond is real easy to collect on. And then if the bondholder wants to exercise its rights to assert a lien, that's up to them. Might cheapen up the bond. But I think this ought to be at least $40,000 to make sure the county's covered.
I don't think we heard much to support that.
I know that, like,
In terms of people who are regulated.
well, here's something to support it. The sheriff met with the Bureau of Cannabis Control along with a number of, on a list of county officials. And it was told to them that they were very critical of the 5K bond for potential cleanup costs as being, and they emphasized, too low. They felt that $1 million and possible $2 million would ensure property involved would not become a burden to the county. That's what they recommend. I'm not saying that's where it needs to be, but we have people laughing at 40,000. That's a lot less than 1 million. This is coming from the state.
Right.
They're saying, this is what you need to do if you don't want to have a problem. We heard from code compliance and the sheriff, they both said they don't go and clean up anything. All they do is take the plants away. They leave the mess. They didn't remove the toxins, they didn't remove the super fertilized soils, nothing. They just leave it. We need to have something to ensure that we have money that we can hire somebody to go in and clean that stuff up, and $5,000 is not going to do it.
The point that's being missed here is the bond. I understand the bond concern. However, when we're talking about mitigation and cleaning up these sites, they're talking about illegal sites.
It wasn't always
People that would
illegal
not
sites.
follow the laws regardless.
We had legal sites that didn't comply,
Then
and they had cleanup problems too. So the reason you do this is so that they will be in
How many
compliance.
did they have?
It doesn't matter what
Well,
it
it
is.
does matter.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Because it matters, because we want to make sure that they stay in compliance. And if you make it too low, they're going to go, I can walk away and leave $5,000 and leave
then
the
be
county the
bonded,
mess.
And then we have a lien
But
place.
it's going to be harder for people to walk away from a $40,000 bond
Okay.
and say, because they're going to go, I want my money back. I'm going to make sure this is
Rather
cleaned
than
up.
arguing among ourselves, Kelly proposed $40,000 bond. Commissioner Fiorino, do you want to propose a number?
I don't have a specific number, but I like his number better than this number.
Okay.
I don't agree with the 40,000.
Do you have a number you want?
I do recall the sheriff did throw a number out of 7,500, I believe. I would feel much more comfortable with that.
I could go with the 10,000.
Wow. Okay, we're bouncing all over.
Well, the sheriff's number was only for the plants. It didn't cover any of the cleanup.
They don't include removing plants.
All right. Yeah, I actually kind of read, somewhere back here, it talks about remediation and that the county has all other remedies open to it. So I went to read up on what those remedies are, which you pretty much described. But it does seem like the cost of those remedies is going to increase the cost to the county significantly. $5,000 isn't enough to clean up much of anything. I think that clearly would cover the cost of removal of the plants for the most part. That's what they both spoke to. But it's not enough if you're actually cleaning up trash and debris. And so I would support a higher number also. I would support the $7,500 number. I'm not sure that I'm willing to go a lot further than that at this point.
I'll tell you what, since we have it's the Board of Supervisors that set the $5,000, just to get consensus on something, I'll go 7,500, and that's what we can send up to them, and they're going to make up their own minds anyhow.
I agree
So-
with you.
Okay.
So I hear a 3-2 vote to increase that to 7,500.
I do have concerns about it.
I do too.
The next item I believe that we're going to want to talk about is how the determination of the road impact mitigation fee will be determined. Will that be part of the fee study, or will Public Works be doing that?
And was suggesting that we might want to put in language similar to what we had in when the regulatory version was sent up 2 years ago from the Planning Commission, and that is the slightly tweaked version would be fees assessed for cultivation activity will be based on the potential vehicular trips associated with the cultivation as determined by the Calaveras County Public Works Department and will be consistent with fees for similar uses, so that this industry, this activity will not get discriminated against. I think we need to have something. I mean, as it is now, I don't know how rim fees are established. I didn't see
Well, they're established just as you've described there.
Okay.
It's based on the number of trips or equivalents. For commercial structures, it's typically a square footage because it's, the number of vehicle trips are based on customers and employees as opposed to residents, which is, based on typical trips per day from a residence.
Now, one thing, Peter,
I don't have a problem with the language you're suggesting. It restates the way a rim fee is established.
which I think it's necessary we have some sort of structure in here. This does not specifically cover rim fees for development of the areas. I don't know if that's necessary or not. This is for cultivation activity, could be interpreted as just being the maintenance and the operations.
I would think for construction, they're going to have a category that it fits in. I mean, construction of a building, that building's gonna fit. However, I believe that we currently don't charge rim fees for agricultural structures.
That's true. The building department, based on the building code requirements, do not consider this, most of the structures used for cultivation sites as agricultural structures because they have employees in them and they kick it into a different category of building code requirements.
Yeah. Ag structures is something that is a matter of a lot of public confusion. It's defined specifically in the building code. It is a structure that is used for the storage of equipment or to keep feed and hay dry. Once a human being is working on that equipment inside that structure, it's not an agricultural structure anymore. And if a person is processing a product inside that structure, it's not an agricultural structure anymore.
I know for a fact that the way that benefit basin fees are applied in this county also levy a different fee for buildings that store or house or process agricultural products. So I think that this could be some messy water. And I understand we're not saying that cannabis is an agricultural activity at this point. Certainly a manufacturing or an indoor grow, that will be handled in a different way. I think the rim fee thing is a bit of a messy situation, and I think that most sites that are outdoor growing sites for grapes or whatever aren't paying rim fees at all. So I don't know what you'd compare this to.
So a rim fee, like any other fee, there has to be a nexus between the money is being collected and the impact associated with it. So the fee that's collected would have to relate to the amount of traffic that's generated from that use. The board can choose not to collect a fee or to collect less than its cost. In the case of other agricultural products, we do not collect a fee. But we certainly can't charge more than the amount of the impact. So we would have to look at how much traffic is generated and what is the impact on our county roads to mitigate that impact.
Well, do you see any problem with the provision as it now exists in the draft ordinance?
Which just simply states we'll collect a fee pursuant to chapter 12.10. No, I do not.
And so if that chapter changes, then this would change along with it.
Right.
But if you read that chapter, it doesn't provide any guidelines.
The chapter just says we'll collect a fee.
Yeah.
And it'll be adopted through a fee resolution. And so there is analysis that was done by the Public Works Department to establish the fee. It's updated occasionally, that would be, we would find the category that most closely represents, if there's not a specific a specific category for cannabis cultivation. We say, well, this is very similar to this type of use, therefore we'll collect this fee for that, until such time as the Public Works Department does a new nexus study and updates the RIM fee.
And there is a section for the fee rate calculation. It's 12.10.090. And it outlines the criteria for that. And says that the RIM fee may be adjusted by resolution of the Board of Supervisors on an annual basis.
I'm not sure what you were just quoting from.
Section 12.10.090, which is in chapter 12.10.
Okay.
Well, I think we ought to leave it the way it is.
I agree.
I don't believe that we have anything that will be considered to be an equivalent for these uses currently, and that we haven't updated our RIM fee structure in many years. So I believe that we may need to direct a fee study to be done for this particular item if you want it to be fair. Otherwise, we're just going to pick something out of the air, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think everybody tries to do their best, but we have all these other fees being done around this issue. We could be looking at that too.
So would you add to D a direction that the...
I'm fine with Tim's wording.
I guess I should point out that anytime there's a change in use of land, a RIM fee can be applied. I mean, so when this was suggested by the Public Works Director to add this language, and we didn't have it before because we thought it went without saying. If you have open land and you build some structures on it and put a business there, now you're going to pay RIM fees.
Right.
And the same is true of fire mitigation fees, any other fees that are going to attend a change of use. So with whether or not the section was even in there, the RIM fees are going to be calculated when you have a change of use of the property.
If there's buildings happening.
Yes, if there's buildings or change of use. And perhaps it would be beneficial to have the Public Works Director talk on this topic.
I just think it needs to be based on something. That's all I'm suggesting, is that it
Right.
be based on some
Yeah.
reasonable,
The law requires that.
yes.
Commissioner Henderson, what do you think?
This is also a mitigation measure from the EIR, just for the record.
Yeah, and I think,
But I understand the point is, does it accurately reflect the
impact.
impact associated with the use?
right. And if there's a building being built, I don't think there's going to be any question. This seems to suggest that if you were just to develop an outdoor grow, that you would have road impact mitigation fees also.
And hearing what he just stated, that changing the designation of the land use, or what's going on that land, does apply.
Does not happen necessarily.
Well, that's what he just stated, it was
But
out of
until a
code,
project
so.
happens, there is no road impact mitigation fee assessed.
But the issuance of a cultivation permit would be a
Permit.
project.
In this particular case.
In this particular case, yes. Where we don't issue permits for grapes or
Right,
orchards or
exactly.
cattle ranching.
Or wildflowers.
We do issue a
or
permit
whatever.
for
Right.
this. And so there would be an associated fee that would be
So that
required.
has to be determined.
Yes.
So I would agree with Mr. Wooster and Mr. Trempino. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
That we keep it the same.
As somebody who worked on getting the first road impact mitigation fee assessed in this county, it took us decades to get one, and it hasn't been kept up to date. Just a little background information on that process. So hopefully our new Public Works Director, though I've spoken to him and I know he's working on some of that, so hopefully this will be incentive.
The next thing that would come up would be the staff suggested change to 17.95.0708. And I don't have any problem with it, except that there's misspelling of the word "or" before professional civil engineer. I thought, oh, we've come up with a new category. There's an "or" professional civil engineer. And I realized that really you mean the word "or."
This is the new. So this is the language that was developed with environmental health.
Yes. Looking for three.
Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I think the revised version looks okay to me, but I'm not an expert in these matters.
Yeah, I'm not either, and it seems like a waste of water.
With that one correction of the spelling.
So I hear three members saying that this language is acceptable, the revised
Yes.
language
Yep.
with the spelling correction.
Is this something similar to what is done for other orchard operations? Does anybody know?
I'm not aware of any other similar requirement for other agricultural, or for agricultural activities.
I'm not comfortable with this.
It's on age, pump test.
I'm not comfortable with this at all.
Well, really, we're talking about the 24-hour pumping that we're on.
Yes, sir, yes.
Because really, this is kind of minimal.
And this is the
I
good
was
one.
on a pump test for a school site in Rancho Marietta, and that ran over 10 days, 24 hours a day with 5 pumps to see if they could produce enough water for a school. So a single 24-hour pump test is pretty minimal. They could be a lot more extensive than that. We had people on site 24 hours a day for 10 days, monitoring the pumps, checking the drawdown every hour, and then towards the end of the test, had to shut off some pumps and text the drawdowns and others and go back, It was pretty extensive. So just a single 24-hour-day pump test, I think that's to meet the environmental impact report's concern about water use. And we keep going back that we're so concerned about the environment, but yet we want to take things out of here that this tells us we need.
I want to point something out to you. Rancho Marietta, correct? This is what you said?
It's in Rancho Marietta.
And where's that located? Where is it located?
Okay, Rancho Marietta.
Where's that at? What county is that
It
in?
doesn't matter what
It
county.
does,
It's
because the
still-
water tables are different. Each
But that's
location
why
has
you
different
do the
water-
test, is to find out what the water table is.
I understand.
That's the whole purpose of the test.
I understand, but their water table is a lot higher because I know
But it
for a
doesn't matter.
fact it is.
You do a pump test to find out how you're going to affect the water table. It doesn't matter where the water, because we
Okay.
don't know that. It's an unknown. That's
so
the whole purpose of a pump test.
I think the real issue here is that for a school, you need to make sure you have water to operate the school. This is self-regulating in that if they don't have water and we're not
Well,
allowing them to truck
it
in
wasn't
water,
just to make sure that the school had
their crop will
water.
be done for.
Exactly.
So, they're actually the folks who are taking the risk for any agricultural operation.
The
right?
purpose wasn't
The-
just for
the-
making sure the school had water. It was to see how it affected the surrounding wells,
So, Lenny-
to make sure that you weren't drying up other residents' wells
I understand
by
that.
putting a school in there. That was the purpose of doing the pump test. This is the same reason that the environmental impact report recommends that we do this, is because we don't know how much available water there is underneath a site until you do this test. So you just say, oh, go ahead and put a grow, we're gonna cluster a whole bunch of them on this property, and you just pump the water out to your heart's content. We already had problems with people's wells being dried up adjacent to cannabis grows. We have some people, if you want to hear from some of the audience members that have had
I-
experience that,
And
that's
people
what this
have-
is protecting against.
People have also experienced this with other uses.
I know,
so
but why
I'm
are we
not-
ignoring the environmental impact report?
Did
This
I?
came out of that, but we want to ignore what it recommends, the mitigation that it says we
Commissioner
need to do.
Fiorino, did I suggest that we should ignore the environmental report? Asking a question that this is a little different than the situation, which is what Commissioner Henderson was pointing out. So the environmental health folks came up with this language and felt that this is what was appropriate. It seems to me that if our real concern is the long-term drawing down or impacts to adjacent property owners, we need some sort of monitoring system, and we're going to come to this later,
Right.
that is something different than quarterly tests where we dump water out on the ground over a 24-hour period. I think that there are other monitoring systems that the state is contemplating, and they are looking at how much water is actually being used. So maybe there is something along those lines that we could look at that would be more beneficial in protecting the neighbors and less wasteful of water. So I'm not sure, but maybe environmental health could come and talk to us about that.
Yeah. One point of information is make sure we're talking about the same provision. I'm referring to the provision that the staff has now suggested replace the subsection H that's on page 19 with a more detailed provision or version of H. Let's make sure we're all discussing the same thing. I think it's a good provision. I think it's important that at the time of the application, there is some indication that there's going to be sufficient water for this grow. And I think the revised provision does that adequately. So I'm in favor of the revised provision of subsection H, but I want to make sure everybody's looking at the same language.
I was.
Yes, I thought you were.
So quickly, commissioners, the revised language, Mr. Wooster,
Yes, I'm in favor of it.
Mr. Fiorino,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
No.
Mr. Laddish?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe this is a good point to break for lunch. We just finished.
Yes.
Yes,
section.
please.
When would you like to reconvene?
No.
How long do you need? How long would you like? An hour, everybody?
Back at 1?
No, 1 hour.
Good.
45 minutes? Inconsistent.
So greater than an acre, how arrayed?
We don't care how it's, I think Peter is suggesting that we not concern ourselves with how it's arrayed so much.
Oh, okay, just in any co-location situation with more than 1 acre, then it's 150.
Probably be assumed that they would group it together for water and
Yeah.
logistical reasons. So,
Okay.
I mean, they would put it on all 4 separate corners.
So I'm suggesting for co-located cultivation in excess of 1 acre of total cultivated area, the cultivation sites within the parcel shall be at least, I'm going to go with 200 or 150, or what's the dimension that you? are suggesting here.
I'd say 200, but
Say 150, but I,
200's fine on this one,
200's fine.
because you are getting over an acre.
To be at least 200 feet from the closest property line of parcels that are not continuously owned or leased.
correct. Okay. So
okay,
we-
now, now that we've settled that, shall we try to tackle the non-commercial outdoor grow situation?
Yes,
Go for it.
Have at it.
I'm going to time you, though. We're not
no,
spending too
you're
much
gonna-
more time on this one. Go ahead.
No, well, I'm expecting you to participate, not just talk. Given what we've done now with the commercial grows, I do think 6 plants can create quite an odor situation. Some members of the commission would probably like to just ban all outdoor grow, non-commercial grow, which, as I understand it, Peter, we can do that.
That's correct.
It makes little sense to me to do that for somebody who wants to have a personal grow that's out on their own 200-acre parcel with their house in the middle of it. So I would rather do it with dealing with setbacks. But I'm willing to consider whatever setbacks people think would be appropriate. I think with 6 plants, you can create a very significant odor. So what I'd suggested here was that we impose the same limitations that we were imposing on commercial grows. And so instead of trying to recreate my previous limitations, I'll throw out the question: shall we restrict non-commercial grows in the same way that we've restricted the commercial grows? So 150-foot setback. To any lot that is RR, R1, R2, or R3.
I think that works.
Yeah, make it the same.
Well, if we are saying that the size of the canopy matters and that the amount of odor created is proportional to the size of the canopy, certainly 6 plants is significantly less than the up to an acre that we were talking about. So I'm not, it doesn't seem like that's completely logical to me.
Well, what's really not logical is to think that we're taking care of the odor
Yeah, I don't.
for a commercial grow by putting a 150-foot setback on it. Whereas for 6 plants, that possibly could make a difference.
So essentially what you're saying here is somebody on a very large parcel could grow outside and anybody on any traditional residential parcel should be growing inside.
Not really. You're talking 50 yards. If you've got a 5-acre parcel, that's,
That's
If you
a
have a
large
half-acre
parcel,
parcel.
that's not a traditional residential parcel. That would
grow in a
be
greenhouse.
more of a-
So in order to meet the 150-foot setback on all sides, assuming you would have to have at least 2 acres. And that doesn't really include, where the house
Yeah.
is. That just,
Yeah,
Or anything other than a square.
yeah.
right. I'm actually okay with that.
We were okay with it.
I'm not.
Okay, and is it clear to you, Peter, that what we're talking about?
So, I guess the question is it just adjacent to residentially zoned parcels or on or adjacent to residentially zoned parcels? Do you need a 150-foot setback for outdoor cultivation of non-commercial use?
I would.
Okay.
I would have that.
And then it would be 75 otherwise, just like
Yeah.
it's proposed.
Guess I saw there was a 4-1 majority for that, so.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, shall I proceed?
Certainly.
Okay, so 17.95.090N3B on page 22. Anybody have anything?
I do prior to that.
Sure.
I do have an issue with the no use of generator except for emergency backup. As the sheriff brought up earlier, there are many people that live up country that do live off grid, and if they so choose and meet all the other requirements, I think just because they don't have PG&E on their property, they should be able to run a generator if they're operating their house off the generator. I have an issue with that.
This is only for cultivation activities.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is if they meet all requirements except for, they have no access to traditional power or they can't grow. I don't see that being fair.
Well, I think the purpose of this, it came out of the EIR. The EIR didn't address where you live, it just addressed cultivation. They can put in solar panels to run their pumps, and then that gives them an offset then too on their.
So then would it be an emergency if the sun didn't come out that day, they could run the generator?
They can run a generator, yeah, in an emergency. That's what an emergency is.
I'm not comfortable with that.
I mean, it's the same on any, we have a power outage of some sort, that's a power outage. Then you switch to emergency.
Come out that day, it's power outage.
But most of the growing is done during the time of year when there's a lot of sunlight.
Well, they would have to have batteries, so.
Or backup. Well, if they want to
They wouldn't
back
be
up.
depending on
Well,
moment-to-moment generation, most likely.
you can have a solar system that pumps during the day into a large tank, and that handles your irrigation needs. It should. And so you shouldn't need a generator for that. And the rest of it, I don't know. But I thought this came out of the EIR.
I believe.
My
I'm not
issue
sure
with
that it
this
is.
is, go right.
I think this was something that was put into the regulatory version of the ordinance we sent up to the board last time, but I don't remember that it was in the EIR.
Yeah, I read it in
Something
the
was added.
EIR, I could probably find it again.
I believe it came out of what was learned from our previous experiment with the urgency ordinance, that generators were often loud, run at all hours, spilling fuel, lots of not very great side effects of them. So I'm okay with only allowing a generator for emergency use. I think there are alternatives, and I do understand that there are people who are completely off grid. They probably are already dealing with solar panels to some extent.
And we're talking about pumping a whole lot of water, as Commissioner Fiorino stresses. And I have a solar-powered well pump now, but I'm dealing with a rather small area. So I think we need to preserve the temporary emergency power provision for a generator. I think the way it is now, the way it is suggested in the draft ordinance is good, and I think I know concerns were raised as to housed in an insulated shed, and that we're asking for a fire hazard there.
There are concerns about it housed in an insulated shed. You're not allowed to put a generator in a shed.
Even the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, that's one of the major things that says it's never use a generator inside a home, garage, crawl space, shed, or similar areas, even when using fans or opening doors and windows for ventilation.
And if it's only on an emergency basis, having it outside of a shed is not a problem. It's for a limited period of time.
I mean, what size generator is everybody using? It's probably going to be a 10 kV or larger, is what I imagine. And I come from the construction field as well. We use them quite often. They're called whisper watts. I did brought them in here. Their decibel point rating is 61 feet at 61 decibel points on average at 23 feet. So it's not like they're putting out this large amount of noise.
And we have in compliance with the county's noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I think, I'm sensing we can get rid of the requirement that it be housed in an insulated shed and would.
I did have some discussion with the building official on that, and he's recommended that that provision be struck. For the record, this was not a mitigation measure, but was brought up as a concern from the prior ordinance. It was one of the largest areas of complaints that we had from neighboring residents, that the noise from generators was very disturbing, so that's why this is in there. This was also discussed by the board and was a provision that the board wanted to see in the ordinance.
So rather than, take that out, because I think we all agree that that's just not safe.
Yeah.
But should we maybe put in a noise level requirement
Well,
for generators?
C takes care of that.
I think C should do it.
Does the county noise ordinance have a noise level requirement
Yes.
for generators?
It's there.
I don't know about
Just a
generators.
noise level period.
At the property line, I think is
Right.
where it's measured. And you might think I'm fixated on this, but I would say on B, we have it not contiguously owned or leased.
Also, I think I would strike D. I don't know why it should be permitted with the building department if it's not going to be in a building.
Well, it'd be
depends.
the electrical, wouldn't it be an electrical inspector, make sure there's no,
There are two types of generators, the kind that you just sort of plug in, an emergency generator, you plug into your RV, or you plug into your refrigerator if the power goes out. They're the hardwired kind that were typical of what we saw previously. And those are the ones they definitely need to be permitted, because it could create a fire problem or electrical shock problem if not wired properly.
Well,
But what do you do with the ones that are not hardwired? I mean, if it's an emergency generator, maybe it's not.
They're exempt. So if you just, going to Costco and buying yourself a generator that you're going to plug in, but typically the kinds of, I understand it, the kind of installation that's used for running a pump or, something that's like automatically going to kick in if the power goes out, those have to be hardwired.
Okay.
Anything with an automatic or a manual transfer switch would need permitting, because you can't backfeed to PG&E
Yeah,
and
you could
fry the workers
electrocute a
down the
lineman if
line.
they're repairing the line.
But I agree, if you were, all you were doing was putting a little Honda generator there and plugging it in, there's nothing to permit, really.
Right.
Do we have a definition for a verifiable emergency? Because we're leaving that up to the permittee to decide whether it's a verifiable emergency. I mean, what is that? I couldn't afford to pay my electric bill this month, so I have an emergency. Does it say that?
Yeah.
Okay, or, I mean, is there some length of time that, you know, I mean, somebody says it's an emergency and runs it for 3 months, is that, it just seems kind of open-ended there to me.
Well, under number 1 there, we tried to explain what the term emergency for this purposes means. Temporary outage of the primary power source due to circumstances that are verifiably beyond the permittee's control and unrelated to non-payment of a utility or other vendor providing or servicing the primary power source. So,
I think that's a pretty good definition. I mean, I
if
think,
PG&E shuts off the power or there's a line down or something like that, that's an emergency. Didn't pay your bill,
Right.
that's not an emergency.
Okay.
I think that pretty well covers what's referred to in number 2. One thing, we kind of kept going instead of sticking with the permitted with the building department. Clearly, if it's required, it needs to be permitted with the building department. And if it isn't required, it doesn't. Do we need that provision in there? Because otherwise, we have to say permitted if required by the building department, and that seems kind of strange.
I think if the generator feeds the electrical system, it has to be permit, as opposed to feeding one, plugging something into the generator.
But if you're plugging a pump into a generator,
So plugging a pump into a generator would be okay. There's no building department requirement for that. But if your generator is feeding your electrical system,
Yeah.
so feeding into a panel or a switch, then there is a permit
Sure.
required.
what I'm saying is, do we need D? Because if it's required, it's required. If it's not required, it's not required. And do we spend time now trying
Apparently,
to...
we did need that.
We felt it was important to have it in there because we had a lot of situations where it was obvious.
Permitted if necessary by the building department?
If applicable, or if that's,
Yeah, if required by county ordinance, make it sound weighty. Or no, it wouldn't be county ordinance necessarily, it'd be,
California Building Standard Code.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that California Electrical Code?
Permitted with the building department if required by county or state law.
Yeah.
I would use standards rather than law. I'm not sure the
Okay.
building code is a law.
Okay.
Was there a majority that agreed to those edits?
I'm with those edits.
Yes.
Yes.
We're going to get to Q here soon. Let me ask on 17.95.090Q. I could not, this was the commercial cultivation shall require separation of 1,000 feet from the premises or 600 feet from the property line, whichever is greater, from any of the following sensitive uses. And then the section after listing those sensitive uses, saying the distance shall be measured in a straight line from the property line of the sensitive use to the closest premises boundary. When this draft says property line of the sensitive use, are you talking about the boundary of the school within the larger parcel?
Yes.
Okay, that's where I couldn't, I mean, property
So
line.
if there's a daycare center or a school, you measure to the property line of that parcel to either the premises or the property line on which the cultivation site is.
But why call it a property line if it's not the boundary of a?
It is the property line,
parcel?
that's what they're talking about.
That's what state law requires?
Well, okay, then I am confused. I'd love to see a demonstration up there of,
Wish I had a whiteboard.
yeah, I wish you did, because is there a property line that is not a parcel line?
No, I actually went in and read the state law on this because I thought it was a little confusing too. Basically, what's being said here is it's either from the boundary of your premises to the property boundary of the sensitive use,
Yeah, which is a parcel boundary,
which is
correct?
a parcel boundary,
Okay.
or from your parcel boundary to the parcel boundary of the sensitive use. Then there are some exceptions in the state for places that the sensitive use is a subset of a bigger parcel, but they're pretty limited, and this seems to be what the Board of Supervisors was directing. So I just think we need to say from the property line of the sensitive use.
Well, no, we do. I mean, that's what was confusing.
No, it says to any of the following sensitive uses.
Okay, but the paragraph after the 1 through 5 talks about the property line of the sensitive use. I'd love, is anybody else on the commission having a hard time with this, or?
Actually, I don't like the setback. I would prefer it to be larger from schools, parks, play school.
But the language makes sense to you? It does to
Yeah.
Commissioner Wooster? It does to you? I'm going to just have to live with it. I'm still having a hard time.
So are we going to continue looking at Q?
I actually prefer a larger setback.
I would go with a larger setback as well. I also think that this list is not, there are a lot of things left out of this that are sensitive use. And the sheriff kind of agreed with me on bus stops. They should also be parks, playgrounds, and churches on this list as well, because those are places where their kids gather. And probably even more sensitive on this after the Surgeon General's advisory, and that is probably going to be a requirement now, labeling on cannabis products. It is on tobacco products, it's going to be on cannabis products. You can shake your head, but it's coming. His advisory says that it should not be used by adolescents.
Well, that's beside the point. Let's get back to our
Well, but
ordinance
it's
here.
not beside the point, because I'm trying to protect the sensitive
I'm
use of
not
children.
in disagreement with you. I'm not in disagreement with you at all. Let's just focus on this and we'll move on.
Park is already.
Park is on there. Churches, I agree with. I mean,
So we had a list of sensitive sites that was part of the general plan, or?
Well, we have,
No,
the
this is really
sensitive sites
reduced.
are part of the dispensary ordinance, and I've got them somewhere here.
Well, we had something for odors and in the general plan that we discussed previously. So that list of sensitive sites included hospitals, medical clinics, things like that, I believe.
yes.
Those were for noise-sensitive uses, I
Oh,
believe.
okay, yes, you're right.
But the dispensary ordinance, and I'm trying to lay my hands on it right now, has its own list of sensitive uses, which I think, takes in the bus stop. Just give me a moment, maybe I can find it.
This seems to be mostly focused on kids, except for the scenic byway, which got itself in there.
I don't know how that-
But doesn't seem to address health issues, people that might be sensitive to
Nursing
odors or
homes.
air quality issues.
I don't know if odors would affect their health. I mean,
Air
air
quality.
quality, but I don't know if that, pollination or something. I don't know.
The playground is included in the park in the states.
Is it?
It's one of the exceptions, though, where the park itself may not be fully protected, but the playground itself always is.
I think, hopefully this park encompasses the whole park.
Okay, then, if we could
Well,
put in bus stops and
suggest that we
churches.
look at our ordinance. the
So
dispensary.
1791 requires, defines the sensitive use are elementary, middle, and high schools, public library, or public park. Or a youth-oriented establishment, a youth-oriented establishment. And there's a somewhat vague definition of what that is.
It didn't have bus stops?
Bus stops is not included.
I was looking at something else again.
That was something that was discussed quite a bit at the prior round of hearings we had in 2017, I remember. The board also discussed that. I think that was an issue before the board back in April or February or April. So we've added daycare centers.
Well, here, at 17.91.030, .00, I copied from the dispensary ordinance, and it has this, unless I copied the wrong thing, it has a school bus stop before the youth-oriented establishment.
That's not in the current code.
Huh.
Might have been discussed at some.
Well, no,
Can that be added in?
I Googled, Calaveras code, and whatever service I went to came up with that.
Hasn't updated theirs in a bit.
Yeah.
But a bus stop for a school makes sense. Although I
Well,
think there was some discussion that, what if you can't even tell that if it's,
Well, and this was discussed quite at length a couple of years ago, I remember, and part of the difficulty with that is that the schools changed bus stops depending on where the children are that they need to pick up. They reroute it. We don't necessarily know exactly where those are. We could certainly get those from the school districts if needed. But
this
That's-
does say the following sensitive uses in existence at the time the permit is
So if it
issued.
changes, it changes.
So,
Yeah, again, that kind of goes back to if it was already there and you moved next to it.
right.
It'd be the
It's
same.
totally
my
a
concern.
policy call by the commission. I'm not advocating for one position or another on this.
Yeah, I would like to add school bus stops and churches on the list.
I would agree with that.
Michelle, I saw you nodding your head. Can you agree with that?
yeah, I'm 1,000 feet.
We need a number from you on distance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brett's calculating.
I know,
What
I'm
he
trying
wants
to
for distance.
calculate too.
Well, I'm thinking at least a quarter mile, 1,200 feet, about a quarter mile roughly.
1,200.
That's a quarter mile.
Did you say library also?
Library is in the dispensary ordinance.
Okay.
That may be something worth adding.
They're not usually out in rural areas
Yeah,
anyway, but
yeah.
might as well.
Hopefully it's not one of the little standalone libraries on a post out in the middle.
Yeah, but I
Hope they don't
don't think
consider
that
that.
would.
I guess we ought to look at, what's the purpose of this separation? I mean, is it that we don't want kids sneaking in and grabbing it, or are we worried about their breathing the odor, or, I mean,
I have children, small children, and I don't care what people do on their own time, but when I have to explain to my daughter what that smell is or why that person's doing that, it affects me, and I do have an issue with that. That's what I'm looking at, is if keeps driving past that.
I think it's more than just
I'm
that.
not questioning the need for this, I just want to, if we know exactly what we're trying to protect, why then.
It's our children.
It goes into the
Children from themselves.
children from themselves or children from the effects of the.
Yeah, and I think some of it goes to that we don't want it readily available, that they wander into a field. The other, like at parks and things, it would be also the odor issue, because our county gets a lot of revenue from people coming in using our parks and lakes and things here, and people don't want to recreate where it smells like
That's
skunk.
in Murphy's.
We can send them up your way.
We let them use the park for free.
There's no revenue.
But they're
Well, that's your
enjoying,
fault.
but we're getting revenue from coming to Murphy's, so
Yeah.
that's okay.
They're eating there.
Yes.
But I think that was the other idea behind sensitive use too.
So basically,
So,
this requires it to be at least 1,000 feet from.
From the actual premise, or
We go
600 feet from between the
1,200
property
here, what would you
lines.
do with this?
Seems,
Just leave it at 1,200 period.
that seems reasonable to me.
Right, and I
What's that?
think Commissioner Henderson was wondering whether that was far enough. Are you
1,200 feet, it'll be comfortable with that.
Just a straight 1,200 feet and not this 600.
Do you want to do it 1,200 or the 600 feet? I still don't understand this, but 600 feet from the property line, whichever is greater, that at least gets you the 1,200 feet.
Yeah, whichever is greater, that's fine.
Whatever's greater, I guess.
I'm fine with the 600 and 1,000, that's,
So am I.
I'll go with the 12.
I would go with the 12 and 6.
I'll be happy
Okay.
to flip to 12 and 6,
you-
and we get our 3.
well, all three of them were in
Oh,
agreement,
okay.
so that's. I think we might be done with that item for the moment.
I had a question, I skipped over P. It's where it says riparian issues, would it be better to be habitat?
I'm sorry,
Riparian.
which section are you on?
P, same section, P, 1795090P. Has riparian issues, is that supposed to be habitats?
Well, it's replying to the laws.
Yeah,
I don't think it really matters. I think there could be some law that's not specifically about the habitat, but about issues associated with
The habitat.
protecting riparian corridors. That's why that word was chosen. But we could say habitat if the commission-
corridor, I mean, it just sounds like it,
Issues.
habitat having an
Think of the
issue,
word.
I mean,
So for example, if someone is discharging water into a stream,
Yeah.
that's dealing with a riparian issue as opposed to, it is also related to the habitat, I suppose. I don't think it really matters.
it's fine with me, I just thought it was
Law is
odd.
what we're saying.
I'm good with this, I just thought it was odd, for issue.
We ought to make sure that we're all in favor of your changes to 17.95.090W, the cultivation posting requirements. I'm fine with it.
Before we get to W,
Yeah, there's a whole bunch.
Okay.
before we get to W, I have an issue with S, which would be 17.95.090S, and this is the no camping or sheltering by the permittee landowner or any other person in a vehicle, RV, et cetera, beyond the normal period of time unless it's a declared emergency. And the way this is written, different people, like a series of employees, could alternate occupancy in the same vehicle, et cetera, every 2 weeks. And you just switch it off and on.
Sort of like moving your car.
I see you're concerned, you see an easy fix?
I disagree.
Oh,
Because we're saying that no one, not the permitted landowner or any other person, can camp in a vehicle more than 14 days.
Right, and so you just switch persons.
That-
And if you
that,
change the word person to persons,
Yeah,
I think under our zoning ordinance, it doesn't matter who it is. You just can't camp on the parcel for more than, what is it, 14 days? Yeah,
by you, do you mean anybody?
anybody. Yeah, so you no camping can be on a parcel for more than 14 days. I'll look at that section
well
now.
then, I mean, we could eliminate by the permittee landowner or any other person, just say there should be no camping or sheltering in a vehicle, recreational vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. Assuming that they're not going to have animals camping.
so I have this marked for a different reason. The sheriff
Sheriff had an
mentioned,
issue
what
with
about
that,
the
yeah.
Butte fire where folks are being allowed to camp or have a portable structure for a longer period of time?
It's
Well,
addressed for
that's-
relief due to
I guess that would be
declared
a
disaster.
declared disaster.
Yeah.
Does that still fall within
So
that?
every year, the county has to determine whether or not that provision still applies. The board made that decision earlier this year to extend that provision of the code for another year based on needs for Butte fire victims. It's a call that the board would have to make on an annual basis to extend that. Doesn't mean that just because you're in the Butte fire area, you can put a trailer on your property. You have to actually lost a home to do so. And now it has to be the person, we modified the ordinance, so it's the person who lost their home. You couldn't just buy a piece of property that was burnt out and plop down a trailer.
So how does farm worker housing play into this? I remember asking this question during the housing element. We don't have a lot of information on how that farm worker housing is going to look like. It's going to be allowed, though, it sounds like permanent housing of some
Right.
kind.
Right. Right now, we don't really have regulations for farm worker housing, so it's not permitted in the code, it's not allowed. It's not listed as a permitted use. That was something that was identified in the housing element that we need to address that concern. It's going to have to prepare an ordinance that allows, where is it appropriately located, what are the standards going to be. So right now, we don't really have provisions for farm worker housing.
Isn't it a conditional use in ag?
You may be right.
Right.
I could address the camping thing first because I'm on that, and then I could look up the ag one. The camping section of the zoning code is 17.040.180, and it's camping on private property. It says, camping outside of a designated camping area is either in a recreational vehicle or other shelter or means is allowed for a continuous period of up to 14 days or a cumulative period of not to exceed 30 days in one calendar year. And it doesn't specify that it deals with any particular individual or anything. That's just the full language. So the way I read it is that on any given parcel, nobody can camp on it for more than 14 days consecutively or more than 30 days in a year.
So if you struck the language by the permittee, landowner, or any other person, you would be consistent with that ordinance
Yeah?
and clear.
Yes. Nice. Shorter is better.
Let's do it. Okay, now, are you okay with the disaster
Yes, I'm
part?
fine.
Are we okay with that provision?
Yes, I think the farm worker housing is something to come.
And- Okay, we slipped by 17.95.090M, the lighting that the staff had suggested change. And again, I just wanted to, I have no problem with it, but since you were suggesting it, it sounded as if something we ought to agree with.
Well, what was the purpose for striking the initial sentence that said, "There shall be no light pollution, glare, or brightness of artificial illumination associated with the cultivation"?
Well, none of those terms are actually defined, and we're concerned that there would be an argument over what is glare, what is illumination. Is someone's porch
Unnecessary
light,
brightness.
is someone's porch light, illumination. So that was the reason we struck that first sentence.
Well, that used to be the whole ordinance.
Right.
Yeah, so now it's more detailed, dividing it up between growing live plants and the not cultivation part of it.
I mean, as Michelle and as Supervisor Callaway pointed out, they would like to see a dark skies ordinance to address general illumination. This is specific to the illumination associated with cultivation activity and security lighting and those kinds of things.
I'll slip it in every chance I get. We'll all be sick of
So-
hearing it and get it done.
Well, are we agreed that
Yes,
the staff suggestion is fine?
Yes.
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 Yep.
So, and then we get to 17.95.090W, which is another staff suggestion on cultivation posting requirements. And I have no problem with it.
Yeah. Anybody?
Yes, it's good.
It's fine.
We had quite a lengthy discussion with Ethan, Julie, and I about how does this work.
Yes.
There's a lot of detailed mapping on the whiteboard to figure it out.
And I'm sorry, I skipped over something that a concern I had. 17.95.090O on page 22, where here you've eliminated "and mulch" from this list of hazardous materials, but I still don't understand listing all soil amendments and fertilizers as hazardous materials. I mean, and we're gonna, I just, later on in the restoration provisions, why we have, disposing or storing all soil as a hazardous material, and that just seems to be rather general to me.
Well, we felt that soil amendments could include a variety of different chemicals and things like that.
It can, yeah, but soil itself, you're listing soil, oh, I see, here
Soil amendments.
Here it is soil
We
amendments.
struck the
Soil
column.
amendment.
Later on, you list, you leave mulch in and we have soil, amendments, okay.
Okay, well,
So soil amendments, I agree that many soil amendments and fertilizers are hazardous materials, but we're lumping them all together at this point.
Just saying that they all need to be handled in conformance with state law. So.
If there are no standards for, if it's, I guess you consider compost would be a soil amendment. There's nothing that
So
regulates that, so
You
it's
can,
okay to
you'll
leave
be
the
in
compost
compliance
in the
with state
compost
law
bin.
by doing nothing.
Right.
Right.
Okay, that's, okay, 17.95.090Z.
Did we cover X as well as
Oh, sorry.
W? I don't
Go
think,
ahead.
I don't think we did.
That was, yeah, X, we had no objection to their new X. But Z, it was indoor commercial cultivation sites shall use a filtered ventilation system. And it's proposed to be changed to indoor commercial premises shall use a filter. And is that because indoor commercial cultivation sites aren't cultivation sites? Or
We
premises?
just wanted to make sure that we covered the bases, and typically an indoor premises is going to contain a variety of different aspects of cultivation. There could
But I
be
thought the
trimming and
cultivation-
other things going on, so we thought that for safety purposes, if there was, a separate building that no cultivation activity was going on, I suppose you could argue that you don't need the filtration for that.
That's what I mean, because premises would include an administrative office trying to keep track of inventory, and to require a filtered ventilation system there seems overkill. But cultivation sites, as I understand it, really, they tried to make that definition so that it's the stuff, the places where...
To stick with the original cultivation site.
Yeah, I'd stick with cultivation sites.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can we, how much more do we have in this section?
It doesn't really matter what section.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break right now.